Good afternoon, everyone. What a pleasure to see so many people in today's session. My name is Loretta Heber-Girardet. I am the chief of the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction's Risk Knowledge Branch, and also I am responsible for Pillar 1 of the Early Warnings for All initiative. So it's a huge pleasure to be with you today in this session that's called Forecasting the Future, AI and Early Warning Systems. Before I introduce our panels, I wanted to share with you one little piece of information that kind of got me a little bit excited before I came to today's session. We work on risk knowledge, we work on risk profiles, and typically we go to countries and we help them look at all the disasters that have taken place in their countries, and we help them analyze how many people have been affected and what was the infrastructure damage. And that takes us probably 3 to 4, sometimes a week worth of work. We have developed a very simple AI application with some partners, and now we control through 20 years of disaster events and calculate in less than a few hours all of the damages, all of the impacts, the number of people displaced. We can do trends analysis. And this is just something that we organized a few weeks ago for the country of Indonesia for their common country analysis, but it's a game changer. It means that a lot of countries that used to lack the human resources and capacity to analyze large amounts of data can now do it in a very short amount of time. So I just wanted to share that with you because a staff member pointed it out to me just before I came to today's session. He was excited. I am excited. I think that AI is a major change for the way that we do business in the humanitarian and disaster risk reduction space. And of course, it's going to be a major contributor to our collective goal of ensuring all people on Earth are protected by early warning systems. So with that, it's my pleasure to introduce today's opening panel. We will have opening remarks from Dr. Co Barrett, who's the Deputy Secretary General of the World Meteorological Organization, followed by Dr. Cosmas Zavazava, who's the Director of the Telecommunication Development Bureau of the International Telecommunication Union. And after these opening remarks, I'm very pleased that we will be hearing from partners with whom we've been working already and having great experiences, starting with Juan Lavista Ferraz, who's the Chief Data Scientist and Lab Director at Microsoft AI for Good Lab, and Inbal Becker-Reshif, who's the Director of NASA Harvest. So we will begin with opening comments from Dr. Barrett. Thank you.
Thank you, Lori. I'm excited about that. That sounds really fabulous. Hello, everybody. It's really an honor and a pleasure to be here with you in this session on forecasting the future, AI and early warning systems. I feel like I should provide a little bit of a disclaimer just to say that I didn't use AI to draft these opening remarks. I confess it's not beneath me. I have done something in the past, but I figured you all would just see right through that. I'll also just note the excitement in town is really palpable. This event is just rippling out with so much excitement and the ideas in this innovation space where AI specialists and partners, and in our case, WMO members, can exchange ideas on how we can better leverage AI to achieve the early warnings for all goal of protecting everyone on Earth with early warning systems by 2027. Quite an ambitious goal. So for those of you who may not be familiar with the World Meteorological Organization, let me just say that we have been for a long time on the forefront of innovation. Going back to our modern founding in the 1950s, we came together to share data and information to support the emerging commercial aircraft space, to advance our understanding of weather and physics of the Earth system, and to coordinate the international exchange of data that underpins modern day forecasting capabilities even today. Several times a day, nations across the globe and many other partners measure weather conditions and increasingly climate conditions using our standards and share this data internationally with centers that compute global weather forecasts, climate outlooks. And this data is then disseminated back to the countries that provided their inputs within hours. We are the United Nations authoritative voice on the state and behavior of the Earth's atmosphere, its interactions with the land and ocean, the weather and climate it produces, and the resulting distribution of water resources. Artificial intelligence is already revolutionizing our line of work. However, it is clear we are just at the beginning and not yet fully exploring the untapped potential of AI in early warning systems. How we can leverage the speed, effectiveness, and reach of these critical life-saving services is really critical to us. Lori's example is the perfect kind of shines a light on the need. In today's presentations, you'll gain insights into ongoing areas of collaboration, initial accomplishments, which can serve as an inspiration for the breakout sessions, where you will have the opportunity to discuss how we can better leverage AI technology in the areas of disaster risk knowledge, detection, monitoring, analysis, and forecasting, and possible impacts, communication, and dissemination and preparedness and response. All four of the pillars of this initiative, Early Warning for All. The Medusa project is just one example of how WMO is collaborating with research institutions, the private sector, and international bodies to refine how early warning systems can benefit from AI to support quicker, science-based, and more effective first responder actions when faced with extreme weather events and natural hazards. We, as an agency, the WMO, is fully committed to supporting the AI for early warnings and all subgroup. We believe that through collaboration and innovation, we can achieve the goals of our initiative. And I just want to thank you for your participation, wish you all a fruitful discussion, and look forward to the innovative ideas that will emerge from your conversations. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the opening remarks. And it's my pleasure now to turn to Dr. Cosmas Zavazava, who is the director of the Telecommunication Development Bureau at ITU, for his opening remarks.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon. I would like to echo your words that we are all excited. Technology is bringing new things, and to Deputy Secretary General Barrett, I just want to tell you that we are the natural twins, WMO and ITU. We come a long way. ITU was established in 1865. We have not turned into a dinosaur, as you can see. We have moved with the times, and we believe too in innovation, and that is very, very important for us. And I take this opportunity to congratulate you on your recent appointment. Welcome to Geneva. The WMO is our key partner in many areas of work, spanning from the use of radio spectrum for meteorology and early warnings. And as you will know, we are responsible for allocating spectrum of frequencies across the globe, satellite filings, etc., and setting standards for industry. We are grateful for our partnership, and I look forward to working with you on early warnings for all. We believe in saving lives, and early warning provides that opportunity for us to alert people, whether it is a tsunami, flooding, earthquake, whatever the case may be. It is important to warn them, and we can save 1 or 2 lives, and that's important for us. I would like to welcome all of you on behalf of the International Telecommunication Union to the AI Summit for Good. Thank you for joining us at what has become the leading United Nations platform for global and inclusive dialogue on artificial intelligence. I'm delighted to address you on the topic that is very dear to me and holds a significant future potential, namely how AI can be used to enhance early warning systems. Let me start by asking you, how many of you, don't raise your hands, how many of you have ever been in a hurricane, an earthquake, or a tsunami situation? Have you ever lived through a disaster? I have a few times. Oh, thank you for raising your hands. So you know what I'm talking about. Thousands of people go through such situations on a daily basis, and we lose precious lives daily. And that should not happen. It is estimated that up to 50,000 people per year lose their lives as a result of disasters, and millions of others suffer colossal socio-economic consequences, including displacement and loss of livelihoods, not to mention disruption and destruction of infrastructure. This is particularly true mostly in least developed countries or lower income countries, unfortunately. Unfortunately, these emergency situations occur more and more often. And as you know, with climate change, year by year, the climate is rising. Saving lives through early warning systems using the power of digital is at the core of ITU's work. ITU leads one of the main pillars of the Early Warning for All initiative, launched by the UN Secretary General in 2022, with his aspiration, of course, that by 2027, every living person must be within reach of an early warning signal, namely Pillar 3 on warning, dissemination, and communication. Recently, we launched the AI for Early Warning for All subgroup to explore, which the Deputy Secretary General talked about, to explore opportunities and present examples of AI use cases and realizing the outcomes defined in the Early Warning for All action plan. This effort also includes using AI to strengthen linkages between the pillars and ensuring country ownership of AI solutions through capacity building. We know that AI presents significant opportunities to transform disaster management practices and support the implementation of all pillars in the early warning system value chain. Its potential to accelerate processes and problem solving is immense, as recognized in the Early Warning for All plan of action. ITU has already adopted over 100 standards, 100, and we are working on 120 other standards related to AI and focusing on AI for good. This is significant because it also impacts the disaster risk reduction and mitigation. We also engage with all the regulators and industry members to ensure that although AI exists, it must be managed, and governance is an important element, and we should channel the power of AI to saving lives. And if you are going to be in Kampala, Uganda, from the 1st to the 4th of July, we invite you to come to our fanfare, the Olympics of regulation. We have we are going to have all the regulators in the world under one roof. And one of the topics they will be discussing is the power of AI and how we could regulate without stifling innovation. And also we'll be discussing the power of space and the space economy and the space sustainability. As you know, we support countries through the design of national emergency telecommunication plans. We assure you we will include the integration of AI so that we can make an impact on the ground. To harness the full potential of artificial intelligence, we work in partnership with other stakeholders such as WMO and others. And as you will know, we have got over 1,000 industry and private sector and academia members among our 193 member states. I would like to take this opportunity to thank our partners, WMO, UNDRR, and IFRC, as well as the UNDP, Microsoft, Google, GSMA, UNFCCC, the group of Earth observation, and the focus group on AI for natural disaster management for their support and active participation. We count on you, each one of you, and our many other partners with whom we engage to leverage AI responsibly, and that's why we call it AI for good, ensuring a safer and more resilient future for all. With that, I wish you all a successful workshop, and I look forward to getting your discussions and also to the outcomes of that engagement. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for these opening remarks. And with that, we are ready to begin with some additional presentations. So thank you. Which I want to go to the Olympics.
Okay.
So, as we have heard, artificial intelligence really has many applications across the value chain of early warning systems, advancing risk knowledge, forecasting hazards, warning dissemination, and communication and preparedness capabilities. And what we're really focused on with early warnings for all is recognizing that far more can be done before a disaster strikes to save lives through risk reduction, through identification of threats, through warning communities and preserving livelihoods. And AI has a role to play, not only in the response, but also preventing the worst impact of disasters. So today's workshop is going to showcase opportunities in piloting initiatives, showing real examples of how AI solutions are already being used on the ground to improve early warning systems, and particularly in developing and in vulnerable countries. And we're hoping that this session will not only be inspiring, but will also help us think of how we can go to scale. How can we move beyond pilots and really make this part of the arsenal of tools that we bring to countries and countries share with other countries to improve their early warning systems? So with this, it's my great pleasure to begin today's presentation with Juan Lavista Ferres, who is the Chief Data Scientist and Lab Director of Microsoft AI for Good. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Jeffrey Hammerbacher was one of the first data scientists in Facebook, likely one of the first data scientists in the industry in many ways. And he said, once he said, the best minds of my generation are thinking how to get people click on ads. And this is true. This is true and sad at the same time, considering the world faces great challenges. You have millions of children that die every year of infant mortality, hundreds of millions affected by climate, and 1.3 billion people living with a severe disability. I think there's a problem in the slides. Give me 1 second. Exception, that's not me. It's not a Windows problem. The world needs all the help it can get. And a lot of problems cannot be solved using technology, but there are some problems that you can solve, or at least you can help. The challenge is that the governments, NGOs, and organizations around the world that are working to solve these problems usually do not have the structure or capacity to hire the AI talent that is needed to solve these problems. And that's basically what we do. That's what my team does. Because something that Hammerbacher didn't fully appreciate was that predicting which children have higher chances of infant mortality and predicting which person will click on your ads, even if these two problems cannot be further apart from a societal point of view, from a pure AI and data science perspective, these problems are basically the same problem, which means that if in your teams you have people that are really good making sure people click on your ads, you can use that same talent to help the world. That's basically what my team does. So I'm going to just share some lessons. And for some world problems, relying on AI is the only option we have. This is something that I shared yesterday. This is Cinder, the city of Cinder in Niger. This is basically the last updated map that we had from the census data. This is every single blue dot here is a house that was constructed and that is not in any map. And this has been a collaboration with Andrew Zolli here in the room and the people from IHME also here. We've been using this data to help do an update of the maps to make sure that we know where people live. If you don't know where people live, you cannot help them. And this requires a significant amount of data that come from Planet and AI models to run on top of that. If you have one human looking at 1 day of data, they have satellites that take pictures every day for every single square meter in the Earth. That would take around 400 years to go through just one person looking at that data. So if we don't have AI to solve these type of problems, you cannot solve them. Another lesson, very important lesson here, is that as humans, we are addicted to complexity. We like complex projects, we like complex things. This is the reason we put a person on the moon before we added wheels to your luggage. And let me tell you one lesson, more important. If you want to impress people and you want to look intelligent, your solutions can be really complex, believe me, and that works. If you want to have an impact in the world, your solutions need to be really simple. And building simple solutions is hard, but certainly worth it. This is something that we learned working with SEEDS. This is an amazing organization out of India. They had a very simple problem that they wanted to solve is they need to understand the material of the houses. Because if for something like heat waves, if they knew the material of the house, they could help those families and they could help save lives. So we basically build a very simple model. In theory, there was a lot of papers published about materials of houses. None of those implementations worked. We built a very simple model that could help them solve the specific problem that they had, and this is now working in production. Satellite data provides an amazing opportunity to make an impact. This is something that we also learned. Majority of our projects fail because of access to data. Not all problems can be solved using satellite data, but if you can solve it using satellite data, it will scale at the global level. That's an amazing power. This is some of the projects that we have. This is the earthquake in Afghanistan last year. Majority of the people that were affected by the earthquake were not in any map. This is the Libya flooding. So anytime there is a big natural disaster, what we do is we work with organizations on the ground using planet data to help map every single structure that was affected. This information is shared with the teams on the ground. And we're trying our best to make sure that we have the data within 24 hours. If we can have the data within 24 hours, teams on the ground can save lives. If it takes 2 weeks, that's usually too late. This was actually our first project in disaster response, was during the Ukraine-Russia conflict. And what we did was, this is something that Andrea and I got together because the Secretary General needed to have information about what was happening in Ukraine, specifically related to schools, water facilities, and hospitals, all of these entities protected by the Geneva Convention. So using satellite data from Planet, we map every single school, water facility, and hospital across Ukraine. And using the data, we were able to know whether they were destroyed or not. And we could go back in time and understand when were they were destroyed. This was critical for the Secretary General. Large language models provide an amazing potential for AI for good. This is the example that I showed yesterday, but just in case, this is another partnership that we have with Planet. We use satellite data. The Planet has a lot of the data sets below, and we use large language models to convert a query from English to Python. And then you execute the Python query and you get answers. Every single one of these queries that you ask here, behind the scenes, is converting this into Python, running the queries, and getting answers. Basically, what you're doing is you're coding in English. And by the way, that works in Spanish, that works in Mandarin too. This provides, less than 0.5% of the world knows how to code. In order to answer a lot of these questions, it would take weeks, because not only you need a person that is very good in Python, it's actually very good in geospatial. That is, you can ask Imbal and me, it's not that easy to find people with those skills. So this provides, large language models provide an amazing potential to help people that need to get answers from data. In our smartphones, we have more processing power than the one that was needed to put a person on the moon. There's very important problems out there that need and should be solved with data. We no longer have excuses. Thank you very much.
What a great overview of the potential of AI. And we're going to be able to dig a bit deeper later on into how some of these applications are taking place in contexts such as Ethiopia. So really looking forward to that. But it's now my pleasure to give the floor to Inbal Becker-Reshif, who is the director of NASA Harvest, to hear the work that's going on with NASA. So thank you very much.
I want to state for the record that the software we're using is Zoom here.
Over to you, Inbal.
Turn. And this is going to work to move the slides along?
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Great. Well, I'll sit this way so I can also look at the side. It's a real honor and pleasure to be here with you today and to see such a packed room. I think we're all here because we're optimistic about what we can do. And as we've heard all along this afternoon, is that there's just tremendous potential and we're really just beginning to scratch the surface. And so I'm here representing both NASA Harvest and the GeoGlam Secretariat that's hosted within the Group on Earth Observations Secretariat hosted at WMO. And I'll just briefly talk about what NASA Harvest is, for those of you who are not familiar. NASA Harvest is NASA's Global Food Security and Agriculture Program. Our main mission is to help increase the use and uptake of this really powerful tool that we've been hearing about, data, satellite data, for applications within agriculture and really across the agricultural sector. And it's NASA's contribution into GeoGlam. And we are built up as a consortium of many different partners across public and private and academic institutes because we believe that that's how we're going to actually make progress. And so everything that we do starts with our end users and starts with our partners, and we very strongly believe in co-development for actually making an impact in utilizing data. And what we are trying to do is look at how do we take this opportunity of the immense data sets that we have? So we have satellite data, diverse satellites going around the Earth continuously, collecting data all the time across the entire globe. And these are at different resolutions, at different scales, with a lot of, and at different wavelengths. And yet how, and we heard already before, how do we transform this massive amount of data and take advantage of it into information, right? Data is data, but how do we get to information, to actionable information that can actually help make decisions and drive decisions, including in early warning, but really across a large variety of challenges. And within that, we have multidisciplinary team. We have an AI team. We have agronomists. We have remote sensing specialists, right? And in order to be able to address these kind of problems. And Hannah Kerner, who leads our AI team, has been arguing that in order to be able to properly unlock the potential of machine learning for satellite data, we ought to be thinking about the unique character of satellite data and developing new approaches and research to be able to fully take advantage of these kinds of data, building new foundational models for satellite data, and thinking about, like we have large language models, thinking about large Earth models. And I've put here different thoughts about where and how we can do this, and also reference to a paper with both Microsoft AI for Good Lab and NASA Harvest. And so where we start from is what we've called foundational public good agricultural data sets, or in GeoGlam language, EAVs, essential agricultural variables. And these are essentially, if you think about them, as the building blocks for being able to answer a lot of the questions and information questions that we need. So where are our crops growing, right? Crop maps. How do we map our field boundaries? How do we look at different management practices? When were crops planted or harvested? What are their yields? Okay, when we start to layer these building blocks together, we can start to get to information. And all of these we can generate from satellite data. And so I'll try to give some examples of these. Here we're looking at the global extent of croplands and change over a 20-year period. We can see where we've had very rapid, it's in particular in Africa, in terms of deforestation, and where a lot of these areas have been deforested, and with cropland expansion into these. And these, of course, can become the basis of a lot of other questions and information, whether you're talking about early warning and risk, whether you're understanding what trends are and where croplands overall around the world are. And then the next question, we don't only want to know where are our croplands, but what we actually want to know are which crops are growing where. And of course, these are going to be different every year, because if you're a farmer and you planted your field to corn one year, you'll likely plant it to something else next year. And so here are some examples of exciting work coming along in terms of different products that are coming out online at a global scale. But as these tools become more accessible, right, as we have more satellite data, we now have the power and advances in machine learning and cloud computing. This is making it a lot more accessible. That's something very good. But what that also means is we have the responsibility as those providing the data to also provide the information about the accuracy and uncertainty. We cannot leave that to our end users to say, I have 10 different crop maps. Which one am I going to use? Because the decisions that are ultimately often being made off of these data matter. And so if I've mapped a whole area that is a crop, or missed an area, that can have real implications. And so here I'm looking at one example, intercomparing, and basically we see a lot of discrepancies across the different products that are out there. Other one is field boundaries, and this is work we've also done with in collaboration between Planet and the Microsoft AI for Good Lab, right? This is our measuring unit of a field and being able to do these at scale and across the globe. Yield forecasting, right? So if we're thinking about what production is, it's yield, it's the productivity of the crop, and it's the area ultimately to get at production. And so we've got a lot of different models, massive advances in terms of being able to forecast yields. And if you're thinking again in the early warning context, if we know where we're going to have crop shortfalls or yields, and we have that information early, then we can take action. And so ultimately the goal is to translate these mass amounts of data into information, and into information that's guided by whoever needs to use it. And that's ultimately going to ensure that these are going to have an impact. And so if we look at how we combine these, looking, for example, at risk. Okay, so this is a project with AMIS, the G20 initiative that's hosted at FAO, on looking at risk to crop production, the 5 to 10 year timeframe. And so we can start to look at, we now know where croplands are, where crop types are, when growing seasons are, and we can look at the satellite data record and start to look at by crop type, by growing stage, where we've seen different warming trends, cooling trends. And in this case, I'm showing temperature anomalies in a warming trend in most parts that are growing maize in the world, and in particular during the most critical parts of the growing season. Another initiative that brings all this together is the GeoGlam Crop Monitor. This has been operational since 2013, bringing together over 40 different organizations to contribute to these. And so it's a lot of complex data, but actually being presented very simply. And this is the last one we just published, that's showing at a global scale, what are crop conditions? Where do we need to be looking at? And in particular areas that are yellow and orange are areas where there's a risk already of crop shortfalls in production at a global scale. And these are used very often by a lot of different early warning systems, including within the UN system, and a lot of them are actually contributing. So WFP is a big contributor, FAO, and others, USAID and others. And I think we've heard already, importantly, being able to also transition these technologies into countries to their own ownership and governance and guide and operation of these. And so this is work a lot done by Catherine Akalembe on working with the different governments and organizations to transfer this concept of the crop monitor into different organizations that are running these for their own needs and purposes and within their own early warning systems. And so then I'll conclude with a few, and I'll go through these fairly quickly, because I thought it would be good to actually give concrete examples of what impacts these have as we start to layer these together. And so this was an example. We had a request from the government of Togo during COVID. Like many countries, they had restrictions in terms of movements, and they had an aid program to farmers for giving digital interest-free loans to farmers, digital loans. And so, but they needed to be able to locate those, and they used one of their proxies was being able to look at smallholder fields. And so what we did is we mapped fields with Planet data and provided that to them within 10 days, and this helped to reach around 60,000 farmers. Another example, this was a request from USAID. And there was one of the worst droughts in 40 years in Somalia, 5 consecutive dry seasons. And again, we partnered with Planet to map all the water bodies at 5-meter resolution across Somalia through these 5 seasons, and found that the vast majority of the water bodies lost more than 75% of their initial area. Another ongoing example, the war in Sudan, another request from USAID looking at, well, what's the impact of the conflict on cropped area? And what we have found both in Al Jazeera and in Al Khadif is that there's around a 20 to 30% reduction in cropped area. And so again, that gives you insights into, well, there's going to be a reduction in production in these areas. The same time, there is an intensification of the conflict in North Kivu in DRC, and there we found the exact opposite, again, using Planet data. In this case, is mapping at the croplands here. And here, in fact, we did not see large-scale abandonment, although that was the assumption going into it. And in fact, what we've then heard anecdotally from different contexts in the field is that farmers are continuing to crop and are having to give their production to M23 rebels and to others who've taken over their villages. But to say that, especially in conflict areas, satellite data becomes our only way to monitor and to look at what's happening and to be able to provide information. And I'll end on an example from Ukraine. We've been working a lot with the government of Ukraine, both the Ministry of Agriculture and the State Statistical Service. They asked us to look at what is the impact of the war on Ukraine's production. Again, at the beginning of the war, the assumption was going to be that we're going to lose 30 to 50% of their production. And so we went through producing all these different products I've talked about, crop maps, yield, looking at which fields were harvested, which were not. And in fact, what we found is against all expectations, farmers are resilient and they're going to farm. And so to the extent they could, they did everywhere except for right around the active front line. But what we also found, and so we're able to provide now statistics on the Ukrainian controlled territories versus the Russian occupied territories. So around 22% of Ukraine's production is being harvested in occupied territory. So that's not going to Ukraine. And to put that into perspective, that's around 2 to 3% of global exports of wheat, or around 30% of US's exports. Okay, so this is not a small amount of area, and satellite is the only way to do that. We could map, for example, the abandonment along the front line, and this is equivalent to a loss of around grain and oilseeds that could have fed around 25 million people for a year. So this information has had a real impact in Ukraine. One of the decisions that it led to was to not put an export ban in 2022. And if Ukraine had put an export ban, given its role in agricultural production and exports, would actually have implications globally. We continue to work with the government to transfer this capability into their own hands. And so I'd like to advocate that we've seen a real need and a growth out of this potential, out of these capabilities, to develop and to have a rapid assessment capability, in particular on the food security side. But really, I think this expands and is a model for other areas of impact as well. With climate change, we know there are more extreme weather events. We know with armed conflict and war, this has very large implication. And we also know with different reductions in transparency in markets, that there's a lot of need for providing information and assessments that can take advantage of satellite data and of course, advances in machine learning. So I'll just summarize and say we see massive potential, still largely untapped, although a lot of progress has been made, still a huge amount of potential still going forward. We need to be thinking, though, both in terms of how do we take advantage of advances in machine learning and AI, and we need to think about how do we work in multidisciplinary teams. I think this is a thing that comes over and over again. It's not enough to just have a machine learning expert. You need the agricultural expert or the climate expert, right? We need all of these to be working together and figure out how to do that well. We need to do co-development. If we're doing science on one side and we think we're producing the products that are needed, but they're not being guided by who needs to use these, they're not going to be adopted. You're not going to build the trust, and it's not going to have an impact. And I think we need to be really mitigating the disconnect between where we are in the science and where we are in applications. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. I found that absolutely fascinating. We know that climate change, but also conflict, other phenomena is changing the risk landscape. And we are making policies based on assumptions. So being able to test those assumptions with data really has a profound impact on making sure that we're making the right decisions, making the right policies. So really excellent presentations from both of you. Thank you very much. We are now going to move into the next part of today's session, which is deep diving into some particular use cases. We have 7 different applications that we're going to speak about where AI is being applied in context at the country level. And we're going to be also trying to understand a little bit more how this can be shared to other contexts. So it's my great pleasure to begin the very first presentation with our colleagues from Google, who are going to be speaking about how AI is being used for early warning at a global scale. And so it's my great pleasure to invite Eilert Benjamini and Gray Nearing to join and to please take a seat. And their presentation is online. It's your laptop that I'm using. Google's work on flood is one of the very first models that we looked at UNDR. I believe there were some cases that were done in India, and they were really quite groundbreaking. So I'm really eager to hear a little bit more about how Google's taking this forward. So the floor is yours.
Okay, I think I'm gonna stand. Is that okay? Okay. Cool. Hi, everyone. I'm very excited to be here. My name is Ayelet Benjamini, and I'm a director at Google Research. And together with my colleague, Ray Nearing, we're going to tell you more about how Google helps communities become more resilient to climate change and how we use AI to do that. I'm going to give a bit of a broader overview of the different types of projects that we're doing. And then Gray is going to dive into specifically flood forecasting, as was mentioned. Great. So Google has been actually AI first for a very long time. This is a very exciting summit for us in that context. And we've been specifically focusing as one of our key goals in how we can help transform and accelerate scientific research. We've been doing that throughout a variety of different domains, from drug discovery to medical diagnostics to climate and to agriculture. We strive to do that with partners and collaborators just like yourselves, especially so that we know that we're really focusing on the most important problems that humanity has to offer, which climate change obviously falls under. We all know that climate change is no longer a distant threat. It's actually here, and its impact is already felt throughout the globe. We know that, for example, natural disasters have increased sixfold in the last century, both in magnitude and in frequency, which means we're just going to be seeing more and more of these natural disasters, and they're going to happen everywhere and all time. Oh, something's up. Okay, I'm just going to keep talking. It's through the Zoom, so I'm not sure. Okay, cool. It's fluctuating. Shows up here. Okay, I'll continue talking.
Just gonna stop sharing.
Stop sharing, do this, and yeah, again. I'm gonna talk while we do this. Okay, so I'm imagine a slide that shows a timeline, and I mainly want to tell you that we really think that to solve this problem, you need to tackle it across all timescales, right? It's not enough to just be there just in early warning or just after or just right before or just during. We really need to look at the entire spectrum, and that's exactly what we're doing. From very early on, which is projects that we used, what we call very much pre-disaster. How can we help mitigate the effects of climate change? How can we leverage AI to reduce greenhouse gas emissions altogether? Right on the very left. And then all the way through, how can we help communities better plan for the upcoming disasters, which we know are coming? We can use AI to tell them where to change their infrastructure, where to change their resources to make sure that they're prepared for the disasters. Then right as the disasters are happening, unfortunately, we know that we can provide information, and that reliable information is key in those critical moments. And then after the disaster happens, we also know that we can help communities bounce back on their feet very quickly with the right information at the right time. And so I'm going to give you a taste of a few of the different projects that we're supporting across this this entire spectrum. So starting from how can we help mitigate climate change and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We were focusing on the transportation sector, which we know is a very significant contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. And specifically, we saw that city emissions and road transportations is very high. And in intersections, we see up to 29 times more emissions than you see in open roads. And that led us to understand that these emissions are coming from stop and go traffic, right? It's not just us who don't like to stop in traffic. It actually is bad for the environment as well. And so what we do is we use AI and combine that with Google Maps driving trends to understand where we can optimize traffic lights. And it's a very simple solution, just like was mentioned before, but really with 5 minutes of city engineer changing the traffic light plans, you can really see change in number of stops and reduction in emissions. So we integrated this technology in 12 cities from Hamburg to Bangalore across the world. And when we see early numbers that are very promising for up to 30% reduction in stops and 10% reduction in emissions for every intersection. That's why we're very excited to scale this up. Similarly, we can use AI to reduce the climate impact of contrails, which are these thin white lines you sometimes see behind airplanes. Those have a surprisingly large impact on the environment. It's about a third of the entire aviation climate impact. And it turns out that if you combine weather information and satellite imagery and flight path data, you can basically try to understand where are those contrails going to be formed and how to avoid them. And so we partnered with American Airlines. We did a few test flights, and we surprisingly see that we can reduce more than half of the contrails being formed by just seeing where those contrails can happen. We analyze this after the fact with satellite imagery, and we really see this coming to life. And so we're excited to expand that as well with Eurocontrol and other partners. Next, as we discussed in the timeline, we see that we can help communities and cities better plan for the upcoming disasters, which are unfortunately going to happen anyway, and as well as these unfortunate things that are going to happen. One of the disasters that we're tackling is extreme heat that was mentioned. 500,000 people a year are dying from extreme heat, unfortunately, and the number of deaths related to heat are just on the rise. And so we really think it's important for cities to understand where are heat islands, where are areas that there's not enough shades, not enough protection, and therefore are more susceptible to increasing temperatures. So what we did is combine aerial imagery and leverage AI to understand where those heat islands are and understand where there are currently trees that help prevent them. We then help cities basically see what could be the impact of putting more trees in different locations. This is very unfortunate. Okay. Okay. You want to try a different? I'm going to continue speaking until something changes. Just imagine how this looks. I remember the slides. Okay, so let me just kind of close the loop on the extreme heat. We provide that to cities through the Environmental Insights Explorer, and it's available for 350 cities. And we see that cities can use it to basically better plan for how they want to control. Okay. Cool. For where to plant more trees in the future. Similarly, okay. This is not going well. Okay, let me move to this. Sorry. Oh, I don't know how to do this now. Okay. Yeah, but that's in my bag already. Okay. Okay. Unless Stephanie, if you have a different idea for how to revive the slides. Oh. Okay. Hold this.
Perfect.
That's why I work for Google. Okay. Cool. Okay. Sorry, I'm going to bring you back to our timeline. And we were talking about how we help cities plan for disaster, which is really important in how they can basically redistribute their resources and infrastructure. But now jumping to what happens right before and during a disaster. We said that information is critical, and we know that people are really relying on information sources to make critical decisions at this time. And that's why we are focusing on things like wildfire boundary tracking to get satellite information along with our AI algorithms to understand where the boundaries of the fire is, put that on Google Maps in various regions, and display how wildfires behave in the current time so that you can make the right decisions at the right time. And of course, Gray is going to talk about floods in that context as well. I'm going to jump quickly to how we help also after disaster, which we know can be very disruptive, very chaotic, and we know that time is of criticality, and information is really key to making sure that we can distribute resources in the right way. We know that humanitarian groups and NGOs really rely on this information to know where to distribute food and aid, etc. And so what we did is basically identify where the damaged buildings are and compare the before and after. And we can see that those locations are on the map and can be delivered to early responders very quickly so that they can take action. To do that, we really had to first identify where the people are. And this turned out to be a much harder problem than we thought. It turns out that many censuses are 30, 40 years old, especially in the developing countries. And so understanding where the buildings are was critical. Our open buildings data set is one where we use AI to identify those buildings. And we found 1.8 billion buildings that were not known and are covering now 50% of global population, are available as an API and also in Google Maps. With that, I'm going to switch it over to Gray, who will talk about deep dive into flood forecasting and what we do there.
Thanks. Thanks so much. Flood forecasting. Okay, so flood forecasting is one of the, I don't know if it's the oldest, but we've been doing it for a long time. I don't know how long in relation to other projects. We started in 2017, and flood forecasting was really an exploratory effort at the beginning, kind of to understand a few things. One of them is, can Google start to build AI models that help in this space, and what does that process look like, and how do we interact with external partners, and how do we, how does AI work? Does it bring benefits? So we started this project in 2017, and the sort of first strategy that we took is we created a relationship with local governments, with individual governments, and the first government that we created a relationship with was India. So we had a pilot in India. And we targeted India because a lot of people are affected by floods in India, and the Central Water Commission was excited and willing to work with us. And so we had a wonderful relationship with the Hydromet Agency in India for quite a few years. So this pilot started in 2018, and we initially built a small AI model that covered about 1 million people. We expanded that partnership to Bangladesh in 2019, and we scaled up these partnerships by collecting more data, working with the governments in India to exchange data back and forth. They were giving us streamflow data, and we were giving them predictions, flood predictions, and we worked with them to also as a last mile delivery partner to disseminate alerts through push notifications and things like that. So we were covering about 200 million people in 2020. And one of the lessons we learned through this, we actually had partnerships, but at this time with, or in total, we had partnerships with 5 countries, 5 specific countries that we worked with. And one of the challenges that we found was that scaling this sort of partnership model was quite difficult. And so we tried another strategy, complementary strategy. Both of them currently exist in the Google Flood Hub, which I'll show you at the end of this talk. So we tried a second strategy in parallel, which was to build a giant AI model. And that's really what we're going to talk about today, was building a big global AI model for flood forecasting. And to me, that was really exciting because it kind of addresses one of the hard challenges in flood forecasting, which we'll talk about. And the other thing that I want to emphasize before we move on, is that everything that we're doing in the flood forecasting project is more or less public. We're not we're not copywriting or we're not patenting anything. We're publishing everything that we do in scientific journals. We may lag behind because it takes a little bit of time to get a paper in a journal. So there's a few things in our model that aren't published in journals currently, but that's just a matter of time. So in principle, this has been one of our strategies for making sure that we can develop as much trust in this AI-based flood forecasting system as possible. So academics are aware of what we're doing. We work with hydrologists. We work with hydrologists both in government research agencies, in universities, and within the hydromet agencies that have official mandates for flood forecasting in countries. And again, everything is public. This is sort of a list of a small number of the papers that we publish coming out of this project. Okay, and this is one of those papers. So this is going to sort of be the basis for how I explain the model. This paper was published in March of this year, and it explains the model, and explains the skill of the model and sort of how to contextualize what we're trying to do. So if you want, you can go read this paper. It's going to have more details than what I'm going to explain here, but this is sort of the foundation of what we're going to talk about. And I will just point out that the model that we used in this paper is now 2 generations old, because that's how long it took to get the paper through the peer review process. But this is the closest we have to the up-to-date statistics. So here's really the problem that we're trying to solve. If we could boil it down to sort of one sentence or one problem statement, there's sort of an inverse correlation in the world between data availability related to hydrological phenomena and the population risk to flood impacts. There's sort of this inverse correlation. It's not really possible to quantify this completely because a lot of hydrological data is kept private by countries. So there's a lot of data out there that you can't sort of quantify. But if you look at the Global Runoff Data Center, which is the largest collection of hydrological data in the world, it's at least sponsored by the United Nations. If you look at the data set in the GRDC, you get a relationship that looks like this. So what's not shown in this relationship is in this plot is the relationship between GDP and the risk of human population to flood impacts. That's sort of implied. There's many studies that talk about that. But what we're showing here is the relationship between GDP in a country and the amount of data that's available to train hydrologic models. So we're talking about models that predict the amount of water in a river. The classical problem in hydrological science is if you go to a traditional flood forecasting agency like NOAA in the United States, if you go to a hydrology department at a university, the challenge that we have is that really skillful models have to be calibrated for the specific location that they're being used for. So this is a named problem in the hydrological sciences. It's called prediction in ungauged basins. The problem is how you make predictions in stream locations without stream flow gauges. So you have to be able to calibrate a model to this specific location. And this is the problem that we're trying to use AI to solve. And the strategy kind of looks like this. So we take all of the streamflow data from the GRDC. So of course, not all the streamflow data in the world, but all the streamflow data that's been collected by this particular agency, which I think is the largest collection in the world. Maybe not, but it's close. And we train one AI model using all this data. And the basic thought process behind this is if we train one model with all the data, it's going to be able to draw from a lot of experience, and then a lot more of the problems, a lot more of the predictions we want to make are going to be interpolation problems rather than extrapolation problems. That's the basic strategy, and the short and the long answer is that it worked. So we're able to make, in general, we're able to make predictions in ungauged basins, locations without training data that are accurate, or actually more accurate statistically than the current state of the art flood forecasting models that have to be, even when they're calibrated in those locations. So the AI models are good at sort of interpolating globally, but actually when you train an AI model on all the global data, on average, it's better in every individual location than a model that's calibrated just for that location. So the AI model really is learning from this large set of experiences, and it's better even in places where you have a lot of data. That's the main lesson that we learned, and that was a surprise to us. The other thing I want to emphasize is that all the data that we're using for the global model from the Google flood forecasting system is open and public. In principle, anyone can get this data. That includes inputs and training data. And again, this is something that we're doing on purpose to maintain as much trust in the system as we can. So in principle, anyone can go and get the same data that we're using. The half of an exception to that is that we are using ECMWF weather forecasts as input to the model, and that does cost some money, so we pay for those forecasts, but it is something that's available to anyone in the world. Okay, so the basic modeling strategy is this. I'm not going to go into technical details. I would absolutely love to, but we don't have time. Please feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to share, as I said, anything. It's all in the papers. I'll probably just point you to a paper that answers the question. But this is the basic strategy that we take. We use an LSTM-based model. And we do that because LSTM-based models match the problem that we're trying to solve. LSTMs are Markovian in some sense. Physical systems are Markovian. We get slightly better results from LSTMs than transformers. Everybody asks, why don't you use transformers? It's because they're not well matched to the particular problem that we're trying to solve. And we get slightly better results by using a machine learning model that sort of matches our intuition about how these systems operate. So we still use these old-fashioned LSTMs. And we take a lumped catchment modeling approach. So we take the precipitation and weather data from a whole catchment, a whole drainage area for a particular location on a river. We apply the machine learning model. And so we have a lot of overlapping areas in our model. We take a lumped catchment, not distributed modeling approach. And again, that's something that we've done basically because of our empirical results. That may be changing in the future, but that's where we're at right now. Okay, so we benchmarked recently. We worked with ECMWF GLOFAST team, Global Flood Awareness System, and we benchmarked our global model against theirs. And the basic takeaway from that benchmarking, which is the focus of the paper that we just talked about, is that we can give similar predictive skill on extreme events about 5 days earlier than GLOFAST. So that's what the AI model can do. And really the skill difference is due to using AI. It's not due to any trick or any extra data. It's really just that AI is really well suited to the problem of predicting flow in rivers. Yeah, and so this is the Google Flood Hub. Everything that we produce is open and public. You can go here. Everywhere that there's a colored dot or hexagon on the screen is some place where we make predictions and make them public. All of these locations have been verified by a human over-the-loop system. So we make predictions at 250,000 locations. We filter those based on some quantitative scores. And then a hydrologist or someone from our team looks at every single one of those prediction points and approves the places that we actually launch publicly. So this is a list of, and we do that every year, by the way. So we redo that process every year. And this is the locations in the world where we feel like our predictions are accurate enough to disseminate to people. And in fact, I see that this screenshot is actually quite old, and I apologize for that. Someone on my team asked me to fix that, and I forgot. India is not covered, for example, and if you go to Flood Hub today, there's quite a few more points, but you get the idea. And you can zoom in and kind of see what's going on at a specific location. The different colors mean that we expect the different colors. Green means we expect nothing's going on. Yellow, red, orange, and red mean that we expect some type of extreme event within the next 7 days. And you can zoom in on that and kind of see what's going on. I want to emphasize that all of this is done in collaboration with universities and government partners. We work really hard to make sure that we're not making mistakes. We work with hydrology teams, again, at universities. We work with hydrology teams at hydromet agencies around the world. And every year we host a conference called Flood Forecasting Meets Machine Learning. It's been virtual the last couple of years. It's been in person before that. It may go back to in person. Anybody that's interested, please feel free to reach out to me and we'll put you on the invite list. We really like to have as many people there from as many different backgrounds as possible. This is one of the avenues of engagement that we have with the community. And yes, the last thing that I do need to mention, and apologies about the time, is that we have a pilot study with the World Meteorological Organization, who has identified 4 partner countries that we're going to work with now to understand how we can transition. So we talked about transitioning from the per country model to this global AI model that we built. And now we want to understand how we can adapt the global AI model to the needs of hydromet agencies in different countries. And we are working with the World Meteorological Organization on this. And I think that's worth mentioning in this context. So thank you.
Really amazing. I wish we had time for questions because I know I have several, but unfortunately we have to move on. Just one thing I would say, it was really interesting to hear the work that you're doing on heat waves and wildfires, because those are 2 phenomena that countries are telling us are becoming more frequent, more of a concern to them, and they need support on how to manage them. They don't have the long track record that we have had in flooding and other phenomena. So this is really good to know that you're, focus work on there. But the flood work is just extraordinary. So thank you so much for sharing us. And we now move to our next presentation, which are our colleagues from Microsoft. And here we have 5 colleagues who will be joining. Amy Michaels, who's the Principal Product Manager of Microsoft AI for Good Lab. Dr. Bobby Reiner, who's the Associate Professor from the Institute of Health Metrics and Evaluation, University of Washington, Andrew Zale from the Planet, the Chief Impact Officer, Solomon Kassa, Tech Consultant Strategist from Ethiopia, and Kevin White, Senior Director of Data Science, Microsoft AI for Good Lab. I have to say, I am particularly interested in this session because we've been working with this team in Ethiopia. And this is really a tremendous personal pleasure to be able to share the results of this work. So I'm going to give up my seat so you guys can all sit down. There you go.
So you come here. Okay.
Hi all, I'm Amy Michaels, and I'm from the AI for Good Lab. Okay, much better. Hi all, I'm Amy Michaels, Principal Product Manager from the AI for Good Lab, and my focus is disaster response and resilience and food security, and have had the great pleasure of working with the UNDRR and ITU over the past year, particularly on pillars 1 and 3 for early warnings for all. And as we have iterated and really understood and listened to what was needed, we've started to develop some early pilots. So we're here to talk to you about one of them today. And I want to encourage you, after we give these use cases, these white boards are because we're here to listen to you. We're here to understand your use cases. These are early days. There's a lot of opportunity for countries and organizations to impact the roadmap for early warnings for all. And it is, I loved what Google said about this being a highly collaborative thing. We are technologists, not necessarily subject matter experts. And I loved what Imbal talked about of needing many different kinds of verticals to create good solutions. So with that, we're here with our colleagues to talk to you about some work we've been doing in Ethiopia. And it's going to be each one of them will talk in the spirit of that vertical to talk about how we are addressing the situation. So with that, Saul, Mr. Kassa, we met at a UNDRR workshop in Ethiopia, and you're from the Ethiopian AI Institute, and and we saw some opportunities immediately to work together on AI for emergency warnings for Ethiopia. I'd love for you to chat about what you're seeing or what's motivating that for you.
Thanks, Amy. Thanks. Hello, everyone. Yeah, I think it's worth mentioning how this team came about. I think Amy was in Addis, capital of Ethiopia, about several months ago, and we took her to her and her team to the Ethiopian AI Institute. It's not an academic institution; it's a research and policy institution established just about 3 years ago by Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, and it's now becoming one of the leading AI initiative in Africa. And the institute does a lot of work around critical areas like health, agriculture, NLP, and this one came to this opportunity. And then me and a colleague from Ministry of Lowland and Irrigation put together a concept note and sent it to Amy and her team, and they were very proactive about engaging. And then here we are. So I think what we're trying to do is solve a big challenge for one of the largest country in Africa. It's 120 million people, second largest population in Africa. And this nation, this great nation, is prone to frequent natural disaster, and particularly flooding, droughts, and also landslide. So what's worse is that how we handle that is very, very reactive. So after disaster strikes, we are always in a relief and recovery mode, instead of to prevent it and then to better plan it. So to give you a bit of context, Ethiopia has a lot of lowland area, so and especially big rivers like Awash. I think the team is going to talk about that. Omo and Baro rivers, and highly vulnerable to flooding. So the challenge the nation is facing is multifaceted. It's limited infrastructure, frequent severe flooding, as you can see here, and also drought and water scarcity. So we need to solve this thing with a better solution. And let me give you just few notes. 2020, there was a major flooding that caused huge disaster. A million people affected, and about 500,000 people were displaced in Afar region. And in 2018, there was another flooding happened in Oromia region, killing several hundred. This kind of situation also creates havoc, in health-related issues. During the 2020 flood, there were about 30,000 waterborne related diseases recorded, and many were affected, including loss of lives. Another flooding that happened in Ethiopia region of Somali, in the east. There was a huge flooding in 2019, and about 15,000 acres of land was damaged, causing about $300 million of crop and very limited infrastructure damage and loss of life as well. So with that, I think there is opportunity, right? And if you go to the next slide, limited everything, as I said earlier, but I would think now this is the main reason why we hear that a three-pronged approach can solve some of the issues that we're facing right here, and everybody's in tech here. So advanced tech, but combined with community empowerment, capacity building, and also kind of heading into a more resilient infrastructure development can solve these issues for us. So with that, I think the advanced tech, my colleagues will talk about some of the AI and then ML and satellites in combination coordination with planets. Community engagement is extremely important. We have the tool, but I think we really have to have that awareness of proactive engagement with the community and local government to apply those tools for early warning system, for better disaster management. And ultimately, we need to inform our infrastructure development and management to be handled by this kind of tools, so that we can have a more resistant and resilient infrastructure and the climate smart agriculture, and ultimately green infrastructure. So I'll pause here.
Thank you. Yeah. We have Dr. Bobby Reiner here from the University of Washington's Institute of Health Metrics and Evaluation. Okay. Oh, sorry. We have Dr. Bobby Reiner here from the University of Washington's Institute of Health Metrics and Evaluation. And wanted to ask him, we've been partnering very closely with Planet and, oh, sorry, this is not Bobby yet. This is Andrew.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, Andrew. Andrew Zolli, Chief Impact Officer at Planet Labs. You've seen Planet's logo on a lot of slides in the last hour. Andrew's going to talk to you a little bit about, and we'd love to hear, how can AI help? How does satellite data help in particular?
Can I grab the clicker?
Yeah.
Great. Hi, everybody. I would like to welcome you to 3:20 p.m., which, as you all know, is the peak learning hour of the day. This is the moment when your brains are maximally ready to absorb new information. It's really great to be with you. I'm going to zoom way out for a moment and talk about the data side of this and how we use very, very large data collection capabilities to scale the kinds of initiatives that you've seen a little bit about. So just out of curiosity, how many people here are aerospace engineers? Any astronauts? Okay, so I want to just quickly give you a lesson from hanging out with actual rocket scientists every day of my life, professionally speaking. So when you build a satellite, no matter what that satellite does, whether it's communications, remote sensing, in addition to whatever you put on a satellite like this one, you have to put a lot of other sensors, and those sensors have to continuously monitor the forces of change that are acting on the satellite in real time. Because if you have a big gap, you're monitoring where the satellite is, and then you let 10 minutes go by, and then you go and see where it is again, you could begin to see a problem emerge, and the satellite could begin to tumble out of orbit. And if you're not monitoring those forces of change as fast as they're occurring, you run the risk of having bad things happen, right? Just leave it at that. Well, I have news for everybody here. We live on a satellite. It just happens to be going around the sun instead of going around the Earth, and we have like 8 billion other astronauts on it. And it is at risk of moments of significant dynamic disequilibrium, moments when the system falls very seriously out of sorts, whether it's a flood, or whether it's a drought, or whether it's a natural disaster, or whether it's conflict, or whether it's a food crisis. You've actually heard many of these use cases that are really critical. So we have to monitor change on this satellite just as fast as the forces of change that are acting on this satellite if we want to keep the system in roughly the zone of health, right? And that's really what we're talking about here. So what we do, and I'll just say, so let's just take a quick snapshot of health of the Earth. And I'll use the planetary boundaries framework popularized by our colleagues at the Stockholm Resilience Center and numerous other places. A group of dozens of leading Earth system scientists looked at the 9 planetary systems that are actually enabling life on Earth. And when they assess them, they assess critical tipping points that actually push those systems past their natural points of regeneration. And in the most recent assessment conducted last year in 2023, 6 of those 9 systems have been pushed past their planetary tipping points. And those systems cascade into crisis. So problems and challenges in one domain quickly become challenges and crises in another, right? So you have heat effects that affect erosion, that affect food security, that affect migration. We see those kinds of cascading chains all the time. So what we're doing is building a monitoring system for the Earth that monitors the Earth as fast as change is occurring, as I described. So what we've done is put hundreds of satellites into orbit. This is an orbit that runs from the North Pole over the equator down over the South Pole and runs between the sun and the Earth in constant orientation to the sun. And then, so if you can imagine, Amy is the sun, here's the Earth, very hard to imagine. There's Amy, who's easiest thing in the world to do, right? Radiating lots of light. Here's the Earth spinning around. Some of you will remember this from kindergarten. This one goes around that one and is round and not flat. I don't know if you've ever heard of that, but that's true. And is on a slight tilt. So these are hundreds of satellites that spin from pole to pole, each one about the size of a loaf of bread, each one continuously imaging the planet every day. So everywhere you've ever been, since there are no astronauts here, we will take a picture of it roughly lunchtime today, every day, everywhere on Earth, because of where the sun is, it's always overhead at constant orientation. And it's about 40 terabytes of Earth observation data a day. It's the whole planet. And we then have a second group of satellites that zoom in on very specific locations that can be tasked and told where to go. We actually use AI. One of the first foundational rules it uses is to take the overall system when we detect anomalies day to day and zoom in on places that need it. Now, the reason I mention this to you is really what we're all trying to do is to build a system that looks like this, where we take all that raw data, it's huge volumes of information, and analyze it and clean it and make it ready for analysis, really by machines, not by humans. Because the paradox is we need a lot of information to act. The problem is the more information that we add, the more time it takes to analyze the information and the more likely that we'll be out of concert with the change we want to address. That's what AI does. What AI does is lets us take all of that information and move us up the chain so that we can begin to monitor all the fresh water and all the carbon and all the biomass, all that stuff we call planetary variables that we then turn into indicators and that we then turn into driving solutions around the SDGs and all the other things that we care about, including early warning systems. So the thing I was going to leave you with is a model, and it picks up perfectly on our colleagues from Google. So thank you. That was in spite of the technical challenges, you did a great job. And I wanted to just give you a kind of a mental model for how we think about this, because it's bigger than early warning. It has to be about efficient action and interdiction. And it's actually part of a larger model we think about around resilience, right? So this, in an era of inevitable shocks and disruptions, how do we help our societies persist, recover, or thrive amid disruption? And what we see is all resilient systems are broken up into really 4 buckets of verbs. The first one is about building regenerative capacity. It's about keeping the system healthy, keeping healthy things healthy. What's the number one thing in your body that is a predictor of whether you'll survive a heart attack? It's how healthy you were the day you had the heart attack or the day before. So if we can keep healthy systems healthy, right, we can actually help improve response. So then the second thing we want to do is in instrument systems to listen for change. And all you've been hearing about, so the first thing we do, building regenerative capacity, the first thing that AI contributes to that is making the invisible visible. It's actually illuminating where all the people, the flood risk, the buildings, the infrastructure, all of this stuff sits. The second thing is then to say, okay, where is this self-compounding change coming from? And that's the first bucket is a really slow task. The second bucket is really fast. You're always listening, right? And you're rate limited by information. That's why we're trying to speed up the information. Then the third one is about responding to disruption. So how can we ensure, and this maps, I think, very closely to the 4 pillars of the early warning system. So how do we actually enable people and communities to act in a disaggregated way? Because when disruptions occur, lots of people have to do lots of things concurrently. And then there's this last piece. And the last piece is about learning and transformation. When a system has shown itself to be vulnerable, how do we then rethink our relationship with that system? Do we strengthen it and bolster it, or do we decide to move our dependency on it in some significant way? And here's the important thing, whether it's the organs in your body and the systems that comprise your own physical health, or the health of an ecosystem or a society, all of these things are happening concurrently all the time. They're all happening right now. There's a part of your life, your body, that is being put into health, a part that's listening and responding to disruptions, a part that's ultimately undergoing regeneration. So I want to give you one tiny example, and then we're going to pass the mic. This is the last one, only 1 second. So one of the things our satellites can do, which is really interesting, you're using AI not just to assess where things are, but to fuse lots of different kinds of information into indicators that matter. And I'll give you one. One in particular is about soil moisture. And using a combination of different remote sensing technologies, we can determine roughly how much moisture is in the soil. Now, too much moisture, you get floods, as we're hearing, right? Too little moisture, you get droughts, and you get landslides or you get droughts, things like that. So using this, we're just looking at the top like 10 centimeters of the soil. But what's really interesting about that is it has huge implications for agricultural productivity, enormous. I mean, and in fact, actually, we're talking about this in front of Inbal Becker is like talking about violence in front of Stradivarius. So it's just a little nerve wracking. But what's particularly interesting about this is, so here you have this like normal range of how much moisture is in the soil, which is a really good proxy indicator for whether or not things are going to grow. This happens to be that main agricultural growing region of Somalia. And what you'll see here is you'll just watch the observed values fall out of range. So that's a leading indicator that something's going to fall. And what we've been able to do with just that one indicator today is use it to power new forms of anticipatory action and new forms of social protections, particularly smallholder and pastoralist microinsurance delivered via mobile devices. When that system falls out of concert, we can directly deliver benefits right at the point of where the changes are occurring. This is happening in 28 countries right now as an operational program, and it wouldn't be possible at that scale without this kind of activity. And this is just one of like hundreds of examples that we could give you. But this is what I think is really exciting, is that we finally actually have in cloud computing the incredible power of marriage of AI and really significant domain expertise and the data to actually build systems like this that can scale to not just the scale, the geographic scale, but the temporal needs of the problems. Thanks.
All right, and okay, thank you, Andrew. So now, Dr. How can we use, and we'll talk about use it, we have all that data, how can we use AI to develop population estimates? And how is that new and novel?
Thank you. So for the better part of 20 years, IHME at the University of Washington has tried to understand global health trends, who's getting sick from what, who's dying from what, basically decomposing health into causes, attributable fractions, and disability adjusted life years to around 300 different diseases. We try to estimate these this burden of disease by age, by gender, and by location. And of course, a huge part of that is having to know something about the denominator, how many people actually are between 45 and 50 in a particular country in a particular year. If we have those estimates wrong, we we'll have a poor understanding of overall burden. So we spend a substantial amount of time trying to take all available data, censuses, different surveys, mortality data, birth data, to try to get an idea of population. One of the really large limiting factors for that is how frequently that data is collected. Censuses, as has been mentioned already, are sometimes optimistically every 10 years. Sometimes we'll have a country that has a census that's quite old. We'll have some survey data that might inform a little bit of what's going on, but really normally our understanding of reality and the population in any individual place is pretty old. So what we've been able to do with partnering with both Planet and Microsoft AI for Good is to get a much better understanding of where there are currently buildings, how much of each very small area is currently occupied by a building. We then combine that with our geospatial expertise on trying to understand the relationships between building density, drivers of population, how close to a river are you, nights at light, to see whether or not a large building dense area is actually just an industrial area, so there's actually not that many people, as opposed to a large apartment complex, to try to get a much better understanding of, we can have an estimate at the country scale what the population is. We've had that for a while, but now we can get it at this extremely fine geospatial level. For us, we then can take that and then do all the things we've been doing, but instead of estimating how many people died of malaria in a country, we can estimate how many people died of malaria in a particular small subset of a country. We can understand how the population changing in that area can tell us something about the changing burden or what new burdens we might expect later. As one example, so we have an estimate. We also estimate population into the future by estimating things like, how do we think education is going to change? How do we think infrastructure is going to change? How do we think disease burden is going to change, to then get a total estimate of population? Again, that might be at the country level in the past, but here now we can take our extremely fine scale estimates of population and then run those forward. Ask questions like, within each individual pixel, how hot do we think it's going to get? How much hotter? How dry or how much drier do we think it's going to get? Where within the country do we expect the climate to become essentially unlivable? As the country is becoming, as a particular location is becoming unlivable, who do we think might move? Might it be those who have the highest education, the highest wealth, those that have the least education, the closest to the most vulnerable populations are the ones that will be left? But at the end, we can then estimate quantities like the total amount of the population today that we think will eventually have to move, or as the population itself is growing and moving around a country, where do we think people are going to probably be leaving from? I'm going to turn it over to other applications of this kind of work. But again, the idea here is having this denominator through time allows us to have a much better understanding of what's going on. Having the denominator updated, not just every 10 years, but every 3 months, also gives us a much better understanding of what's happening, who might have been affected by what, and where they've gone.
Thanks so much. Okay, and then so you see Ethiopia here, and you heard Saul and talk about what the issues are, and Andrew about what the opportunity is. So we've started within the AI for Good lab to start to apply some of these concepts to various parts of Ethiopia to start to map the risks of floods. So Kevin's going to talk about that now.
Thank you, Amy. I think I get to talk about all the great work that they did. What we've done is we've applied these models to really get at, where do we see those populations changing over time? That temporal aspect that Bobby and Andrew talked about, super important. How do we overlay that with then different factors? And these are the beginning proof of concepts, right? How do we overlap that with what we see? Flooding, historical flooding. How do we overlap that with crops, for example? So let's just look at one example. Doloado. This is November 2023. Okay. And if you look at 2017 data, this is the population. Okay. Now this is leveraging the AI models built on exactly what Andrew and Bobby said. Okay. Identifying population densities, putting in estimates. Now let's fast forward and look at a newer image and the newer density estimates. And you can see in blue where the growth has been. And again, no census has picked this up. But now let's overlay some historical flood. Okay, so this is looking back 5 years using satellite imagery and mapping out where these flood risk plains have been. Now, if you're a public policy professional here, you immediately see two areas that jump out. You see the lower right, where you have folks that are growing right up onto the floodplain. And then if you look in the top here, you're actually encroaching on the floodplain. All of this built using the components that we're talking here and going to feed directly back into the work that Saul and his team are working on with the Department of Ministry of Interior, let's put it that way. Now let's look at Afambo. This is one of the valleys in Ethiopia. You can see the population here in red. Again, using the satellite imagery and the modeling that Bobby and UW and his team have put together. When we overlay flooding, say, okay, we see some people that are encroaching on flooding, but we see in the value when we add crops where those lands are being used. And when you look at this, you see in the flood areas, and especially in the massive flood that happened last year, 7,000 people, 1.2% of the population there is living in the floodplain or within a quarter of a kilometer. What's equally as important was 11% of the cropland was flooded, which will also directly affect the people that live there, even if they weren't right there in the location. So when we talk about scale, this scales up to the country by being able to leverage this, by going back to what Andrew said about the capabilities of using satellite imagery, and this can scale to the world as we do that. And it can also scale to identify when you map this over infrastructure, as Amy had mentioned earlier in her talk, this is one of the main rail lines that's actually delivering the food. So not only if you flood that cropland, it's going to impact the ability for that food to get out of the region and go into other areas. So I know we're short on time, so I'm going to pass it back to Amy and Saul, and that's how the AI is now being applied.
Thanks, Kevin. So, it's great to have the information, but as others have said, how do you actually, what do you do with that information? How do you use it?
Yeah, I mean, great stuff here. So it gets me very excited. As someone who's representing like a policy institute, this is exactly what we want to do and what we want to use to do this, exactly this. Because I think the first important thing that we want to leverage from this pilot is a policy mitigation, right? So we can better plan our infrastructure protection and new developments, and we can better apply effective risk-based and with a very constrained economy. When disaster hits, usually aid comes in, but aid comes in for relief, not for sustainable solution. What we want to do next is that why can't we build a tool to make this natural disaster better managed in the first place? So I think it's gonna help with that. So the second one is I really want to stress this, that we want to work with international partners like what we do right here with Microsoft's AI for Good Lab. Ultimately, we want this pilot to be a role model for other similar economies in sub-Saharan Africa and elsewhere. We also want to secure multilateral collaboration. If we succeed in this pilot, I know that the scaling, without mentioning the technical element, would be very promising, because there are a lot who are keeping an eye on this to support, to come in, help, with the UN and the World Bank, and we already having a conversation with those entities saying that, hey, we're doing this, and then what they're saying is that come back to us after you have an effective pilot. So I think that's very important for us, and ultimately we want to scale up. And my wish, my desire is to have this kind of model to be scaled up on its own, but also we want to have a multi-hazard EWS approach. Because earlier I mentioned drought is another issue for us. There is some devastating situation that happened in Ethiopia about 3 years ago. I don't know if you guys heard about it, but in Borno region, severe drought caused 3 million cattle death. I mean, you can relate that to the livelihoods of pastoralists and even the aftermath of that devastating situation. So we really want to see more EWS systems enabled by tech and AI that can help us better manage it. So, and this is particularly personal to me, because as someone who's a repat, after living 21 years in the US and coming back to my country of origin to support, I have a software engineering background and also management consulting, but working with a great team like this and to impact my country of origin, to have this kind of large scale impact solution is something that's very close and dear to me. So hopefully everybody's going to join this movement. Thank you.
Great. So how can other countries benefit from this work? We'd love to hear about it. So as I mentioned, the whiteboards are here, and after the break, we'd love to engage with you on this topic. Thank you so much.
I know we're running massively over schedule, but I have loved every single presentation that I've heard so far, and I've learned a lot from everyone. So really, congratulations to all of our speakers so far. However, we are about 20 minutes running late, so we will move ahead with our next presentations quite quickly. Maybe cut the break a few minutes, but let's please invite Dr. Bolivar Razo from the National Institute of Meteorology and Hydrology from Ecuador. Ecuador is one of the 30 countries of the first cohort of Early Warning for All. It's getting ready to launch the Early Warnings for All initiative in Ecuador. So it'll be very exciting to hear from Dr. Razo, who's the Executive Director of the National Institute of Meteorology and Hydrology, about how AI is being used in Ecuador. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much for being me here. First of all, I apologize about my English because in Ecuador I not really speak English all the day, so it's sure that I will have some errors in my English. So apologizing in advance for that. Well, I will be tell you about the history of geoglows in Ecuador. Where is the pointer? So it's important to understand, first of all, what is the context of Ecuador. So in Ecuador, we have really complex conditions. We are in the middle of the tropical region and traversed in the middle from the Andes. So we have really complex condition. We are influenced by the migration of the intertropical convergence zone, also by the changes over the ocean, El Niño and La Niña conditions, a warmer and a colder ocean in front our coast. We also have a lot of interactions and humidity transport from the Amazon region, from the Pacific to El Niño and La Niña. So we are in the middle of a complex context. As I say, we have a lot of climate zones in Ecuador because the Andes especially, because the altitude configures a lot of climate zones, because we have a variation of altitude from 0 to 6,200 meters. So it's kind of a great wall in the middle of the country. So we have also a lot of rivers that are configured by the existence and of the Andes. So it's a reality also, the climate change. All models are on agreement that the temperature are rising, so we are in a warmer planet. So in a warmer planet, we have more evaporation, more evapotranspiration also. So a modification in the precipitation patterns. That and this produce an increase in the frequency and intensity of extreme events. For example, droughts and floods. So it's a reality that in Ecuador we have this. For example, hydrological droughts that in this year, in 2024, around March and April, we have an energetic crisis, power outages during droughts. But also in the beginning of the year, also we have floodings related with El Niño. And in the dynamic at the Hydromet Service of Ecuador, the last 6 years, we have observed changes in the intensity of the extreme events. That, of course, affect human lives and the economy. In Ecuador, we also the last 2 years we are in trying to adapt to these new changes, and enhancing a early warning system should be the goal. For example, this is the maps of our meteorological warning bulletins of intense rainfall. So we create, or we produce that when identify extreme conditions in rainfall, and also important changes in temperature. So this is a product of that on developed the last 1 year and a half. So this is our principal product that is published on our web page, and also in all our social media. These meteorological warnings also are reported now to the CAP, the Common Alerting Protocol. So we report to the this international platform to inform these meteorological warnings. And in Ecuador, we also work in coordination with the Secretary of Risk Management, that they also report these alerts through SMS in the country, to alert also if a meteorological warning are active. And this is GeoGlows, the hydrological part. So we adapt the GeoGlows, that is a global hydrological model developed by Geo. So this model uses are powered by the European model, the ECMWF. So so with GeoGlows adapted for Ecuador, we are able to produce the 15 days forecast in the future, but we also use the era 5 reanalysis to simulate the history. So how the GeoGlows works is uses the meteorological forecast as inputs. So with the HTCL hydrological model, we produce the runoff, and the runoff is route over all the global rivers through the rapid model to produce the stream flow. So this is the adaptation of GeoGlows. Is already adapted for all the rivers of Ecuador, around the 2,200 rivers in Ecuador. So we developed more the code to activate, for example, these alert triangles that are programmed to be activated automatically when discharge levels reach alert thresholds. So this is a new adaptation. This is a modification of the original code that are doing by the Ecuador, by the Hydromet service. So if we click over the rivers, we can access to the 5 days forecast and also to the history from 1980. We are also develop more the code to also call in this platform the meteorological alerts. So we can put together the meteorological alerts and also the GeoGlows forecast, because the hydrological responses are related with meteorological inputs. We also develop or called, for example, a satellite-based rainfall estimation products as IMERG, that we can also see in the same platform. This is, we also connect some outputs of the FFGS, Flash Flood Guidance System from WMO, to have these products that help us for specifically for flash flood events. We also develop the code to visualize also and produce alerts related with droughts. I don't remember exactly the detail, but is related when the stream flows are very, very low during 4 or 5 days, I think. We activate also the an alert of hydrological routes. And we also develop some automatizations to having a standard report that an expert then can write and modify before publish this. This tool is also used permanently by the National Secretary of Disaster Risk Management through the 2 big national centers that are located in the capital, Quito and Guayaquil, that are the 2 big cities in Ecuador, and also 18 regional units. So GeoGlows is actually a permanent tool in Ecuador. This is an example of how the Secretary of Disaster Risk Management uses GeoGlows. They can charge the shapefile of their local office and do a monitoring if some hydrological alerts are activated. In some cases, this alert will produce have already produced some floodings. And how we can mix or use GeoGlows with AI, excuse me, is with a latest development that calls Saber. Saber is like the latest development of GeoGlows, that is the stream analysis for bias estimation and reduction method. How this work? Of course, it is important to have the local information, observations. So GeoGlows with Saber can assimilate gauge data. So the streamfall data from the gauge basins are used to calculate the bias correction for ungauged watersheds with similar characteristics. So with this training, we can complete ungauged basins. So it is important to note that we can train the model Saber if we have more and more observations in this platform. So how Saber works, in other words, is like over ungauged basins can be estimated by comparing them to gauge basins. So this comparison is based on their proximity, the hydraulic collection, and similar characteristics as in general, and using machine learning clustering techniques. We can use this training to complete or to correct the bias in ungauged basins. We already have some other, we will start some other developments using AI in Ecuador in the Hydromet service. For example, using some algorithms of machine learning like random forest or XGBoost to train models and calculating hydrological model with inputs and outputs. For example, using as inputs data estimations, for example, Persian or WRF that we also calculate in Ecuador, and we will train that with observed stream flow. So with this training, with this algorithm already trained, we can then use WRF as the input to having hydrological forecast. We will start some future tests using different channels from the GOES 16. For example, we can use some of the 16 channels of GOES training to observations, in situ observations, using convolutional neural networks that is already applied in some papers to find the patterns when heavy rainfall will be happens. So to finalize, this is our expectations and prospects and future collaboration It is important that the global forecast models and tools, it's a reality that will be continuous evolve using new AI algorithms, but it is also important to include more in situ observations. Another important thing to take into account is that robust and accurate global model products need to be developed and made available through, for example, WIPS. That is a platform of WMO where we can mix or we can share various global hydrological models to work with various hydrological models, because there are no only one perfect hydrological model. It's important to work together with various hydrological models. And the exposure, vulnerability, and social data is also needed to combine with hydrology tools to study the social impacts. For example, the impact of water streams over loss of lives, health, and the economy. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to be here.
Thank you very much. And it's going to be really interesting to see how this plays out in the context of Ecuador's own rollout of early warnings for all. So really eager to follow this and to see how it comes to bear on this initiative. Well, we are again running really short on time, and we have 3 more presentations. So I would ask speakers to please, if you can, keep it to the time limit, or even shorten it if possible, so that we can get to the next section of the today's event. So I'm very happy to welcome Mr. Chris Emberson from ITU and Paul Hamilton from ITU as well, who is going to be speaking about the use of AI to identify populations that have no ability to receive early warning notifications due to lack of electricity, and therefore have no access to cellular, broadband, or siren-based technology. This has been a huge issue for us in the Early Warning for All initiative, because we really are looking for end-to-end, leave no community behind. So how AI can help us achieve this objective is something that I'm hoping you'll tell us about now. So thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Hello, thank you very much. Testing. Okay, we're working. Okay, so my name is Paul Hamilton. I'm responsible for the operations and development of the ITU disaster connectivity map. This is my colleague Chris Emberson. So the DCM was set up in 2020 in collaboration with the UN Emergency Telecommunications Cluster and the GSMA. It's a response tool in the aftermath of disasters, and it's used by first responders to be able to allocate resources, to know where to send network engineers to set up emergency telecom networks. It's been activated more than 50 times, typically in response to tropical cyclones, to volcanoes and earthquakes. What's it all about? So if you look at the slide here, this is an example from Fiji, from Cyclone Winston in 2016. You can see the impact that this cyclone had on Telecom of Fiji Southridge Tower. It completely destroyed the tower. If we look to the map on the right, you can see the Southridge Tower here. So this tower was critical for sending microwave links both across the main island of Viti Levu, but also out to other islands. So when this tower came down, connectivity was lost to different islands within Fiji. So I'm very happy to say that we're able to be an early adopter of the AI-generated high-resolution population time-enabled, high-resolution time-enabled population density data that's been developed by Microsoft AI for Good Lab, Planet, and IHME. So how do we, the mission of what we're trying to do is to detect network outages. How do we do that? So what we do is after we're activated, we set up a real-time measurement campaign, connectivity measurement campaign, which is pinging people's fixed and mobile devices in a small area after a disaster. This is shown on the map here for Fiji. Again, for Fiji in a green color ramp. And we compare that to a baseline data set of known connectivity points. And if gaps emerge, then this can indicate to us where network outages might have occurred and therefore where to send network engineers. So let's run this through a couple of days after Cyclone Yasa in December 2020. And here are data points coming in. We can see a couple of areas here that became clear to us there was a lack of connectivity. Now, a particular problem that we've got, and it's a blind spot for us here, is we can't tell if this lack of data points is because the network's been taken down or because people have left or have been evacuated from the area. And so this is really important in terms of the ability to deliver early warnings. So moving from disaster response to disaster preparedness, what we're doing as part of the Early Warnings for All initiative is to answer two basic questions. First of all, what are the telecom coverages in the given countries? So what channels can be used to send early warning notifications through fixed devices, SMS, for example, through 2G devices, or any other messaging service through 3G+. And the second question is how many people live in areas beyond the reach of all telecom networks. So the first job that we need to do here is we've got a good collection of data sets in the DCM, and these are updated in real time after disasters. So we can have a mobile coverage data set that was up to date as of yesterday. This shows you the extent of fixed broadband coverage in Fiji. This is 2G coverage. This is 3G plus coverage. And according to our calculations, we've got about 96% of the population are within reach of one of these networks. Flip that over. Conversely, up to as many as 4% or 41,000 people in Fiji are beyond the reach of these existing networks. So let's look at these populations and where they are. The next thing that happens is after a disaster happens, things change. This is the picture when all the networks are working. But as we've seen, networks go offline, which means that you can't send emergency notifications to those people. So if we replay this, let's call it a single hazard event with Cyclone Yasa in Fiji, this shows the track of the storm coming across Vanua Levu. By the time the center of the storm hit these Northern Islands, it had developed into a Category 5 storm, and up to 80% of the buildings in these islands here were damaged or destroyed. There's very significant damage to network infrastructure caused by the high winds and extensive flooding. If we see what that does in terms of the population that went offline, by our calculations here, that's increased from 41,000 to 56,000 people have, and now you can't send them another message. At this point, I'll pass over to my colleague, Chris.
Thank you, Paul. Okay, hopefully you can hear me. So this is a project, obviously, as Paul has said, we're early adopters of the great work that Planet, Microsoft and IHME have done. And this is really a question of scale. And I'm going to zoom into some key areas to show what I mean. The DCM the database currently comprises somewhere near 200 million data points of connectivity through time for many areas around the world. And importantly, that resolves to 100-meter grid cells, so 100 meters by 100 meters. At the moment, you can see the northern half of Vanuatu. The pilot for this work, by the way, is a 3-country pilot: Vanuatu, Fiji, and Tonga, all neighbouring small island developing states. So you can see here on the map, Vanuatu has, this is the northern part of the country, obviously. The population density, the normal population density, is yellow to brown underneath. The lighter areas are where we've calculated people to be beyond network reach. Normally, there are 250,000 mobile subscribers. We calculate it to be 19% of that are unconnected under normal circumstances. So in late February, early March of last year, there was a multi-hazard environment, if you like, 2 tropical cyclones and a 4.9 magnitude earthquake. So obviously this has a compounding effect when, you know, communication infrastructure is taken out. There's an inability to warn people about incoming problems. So as we look, the tropical cyclone Judy passed through. The population that aren't connected almost doubled to 120,000. And then as we see this through time, we can see that gradually through time, networks are restored and that number decreases. So that by the 13th of March, we're back down to somewhere near normality. And this is Ambay Island that I'm going to zoom into. Again, we're here still at 1 kilometer resolution. Before any of the storms happened, the normal population is about 13,000, and the number of people beyond connectivity is about 1,700. Both by the 4th of March, Tropical Cyclone Kevin is hit at this point, and everybody on the island, well, nobody has connectivity, if you like. By the 5th of March, connectivity is coming back. And by the 13th of March, we've got full restoration, or as it was before. What I want to show for context is this is the official damage assessment that was produced by UNITAR and UNISAT directly after the event. And obviously we've looked at this to verify our work. You can see from the inset in the top right that the area we're looking at, the area of coastline, is on the west of the country. And so and it's rotated so you can see. But we've got the damage assessment includes things like landslides, and on the right we've got potentially affected houses, which is quite interesting. Oops. Okay, that doesn't work. Okay, very good. I can just click zoom in. So I've georeferenced that image, if you like, to exactly where it belongs on the coastline. And again, can you click the next slide? So with this, we're now resolved down to 100-meter grid cells. This is the data directly from Planet, IHME, and Microsoft. And this is telling us where people are located using AI-derived techniques through time. So before the events, this is the population distribution for that area of coastline. Next slide. There's a change after the event in March. You've got a reduction in visible cells. Again, next click. Okay. Oh yeah. Okay. Where the UNITAR and UNISAT affected houses were, that's exactly where we're seeing a difference in the cells. So this is like an independent official validation that the work that you've seen already and that we're using in an early adoption use case really works. So as we've already mentioned, this is a problem of multifaceted problem about which messaging channels we need to know. How can people be identified? We need to quantify how many people are offline, and and where they are critically, really at high resolution. And how does that change? How does the ability to contact people change as in the aftermath of disasters, especially if one comes after the other? So the plan for the latter part of this year is to scale this initial pilot up to 30 countries, as I said, at 100 meters by 100 meters. And really, this is laying the foundations for broader early warning connectivity risk. And it's exciting times, really, because this type of work has never been done before. Bit of a bedtime reading, disclaimer. That concludes the presentation. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we have actually got 3 more presentations, but like I said, they're all a wealth of information for us. And so I'm very pleased to invite Dr. John Cox, the scientific officer from WMO Science and Innovation, who's going to be talking about the Decision Support Dissemination System, which is funded by the European Commission, Horizon Europe Program, consortium of 29 partners. But of great interest to me is how it supports risk and vulnerability assessment using AI. So thank you. The floor is yours. Please keep to the time if you can.
Laurie, thank you. I will do my very best to stick to time, primarily in part, friends, because I hope some of you, at least, this will not be completely new information. The Medusa project was actually presented yesterday by 2 colleagues, Monique Kuglitsch, who I can see in the room here, and Elena Slobacki at the session yesterday, which was on AI in the future, for the future of climate prediction. So really here, what I want to do is just give you a brief overview. In part, that's also because I should confess I'm not myself a technical AI specialist. There will be one slide which I will flash up very briefly showing us a software architecture, but I will do my best to gloss over that very quickly and make sure that I stick to time. For those of you that were here at the start of this session, you heard from my WMO colleague, the Deputy Secretary General, Co Barrett. One of the things that Co talked about and certainly resonated with me, I wanted to repeat it now, was that the culture of innovation that WMO is trying to foster, and how our interaction with AI and bringing that into early warnings for all is really something that we're trying to focus on. WMO is actually quite a small organization, and an even smaller team within that small organization is science and innovation. And that's where I sit. We're not ourselves in the main technical specialists. Our role really is to bring different organizations from the private sector, from academia, from international organizations, all of these different bodies, different sets of expertise, to bring them together. The Medusa project is one example of that. I think it's hopefully clear from the name that it involves both early warnings and the Mediterranean region. As Laurie said, it's funded by the European Union's Horizon program. It's a large consortium. What we're trying to do is develop multi-hazard early warning systems that are more comprehensive than the sort of patchy and piecemeal offerings that currently exist. What we're using that to do with AI, both at the front end and at the back end, is convert that into a decision support and dissemination system for first responders. The way that we will interact primarily with early warnings for all, and that's what we're here to talk about this afternoon, is through the countries which we operate in. Yes, it's a Mediterranean basin focus, but we actually have these twin pilot sites which extend from Northern Europe, Sweden, and into Ethiopia. You've heard already from Solomon and colleagues at Microsoft a great deal about how Ethiopia is one of the fundamental sort of test beds or priority countries for early warnings for all. We're hoping that the work that we're doing in Medusa will make an additional contribution to that. So our vision, I won't run through this in detail in the interest of time. I'll pause. Thank you for that public announcement. Right. Our goal with the Medusa project is really just the last bullet point that I want you to refer to. Provide actionable natural hazard and extreme weather impact and finance forecasting. In addition to that, the prior bullet point, focusing on extreme event hotspots and at-risk communities. Rapid deployment of first responders is really the most fundamental way that early warnings for all can help save lives. Yes, of course, we need to have early warnings in advance of tropical cyclones we just heard about in Fiji, for example, flash flooding events, riverine flooding, hydrological events. But once those events are happening, have happened, having first responders on the ground as quickly as possible in the right places with the right information is really going to help save as many lives as possible. And that, I think, is what Medusa is trying to do in our target countries. So I said that it's a consortium. WMO is currently leading this consortium. We're in the process of transitioning the leadership of the consortium, in fact. We have a large number of partners. There's a very, I guess you probably can't see the detail of all those logos there, but what I want you to take away from that picture and from the bullet points is whether it's international organizations, whether it's the private sector, whether it's academic institutions, NGOs, the insurance and finance sector, we've brought a whole raft of different organizations together that are interested in making sure that these decision support systems can be used to really make first responders as effective as they can be. So again, this I will gloss over very quickly. There's a project structure, different work packages. What we are building up towards, what the arrows show we are building up towards is a multi-platform demonstrator. In the European Union's parlance, this is going to be at a technology readiness level of between 6 and 8. Now, you can go away and look up those technology readiness levels, but what that means in practice is that we expect and intend and indeed are contracted to deliver a product which is actually at least in a pilot phase and tested and operational in certain sites. Again, this is far too much detail given the time constraints that we have, but what I want you to take away from this is that we are working in 4 different twinned sites. And the concept of these twins is a simple one. We take 2 different places. One example might be Venice and the Nile Delta around Alexandria, subject to the same types of natural hazard. In that case, it's coastal flooding, whether that's tidal flooding or riverine flooding. Those twinned cases have one place, one region with perhaps relatively higher capacity, relatively higher ability to respond, relatively higher levels of experience, and taking that expertise and using it to share and build capacity in a region which, subject to the same issues, perhaps doesn't yet quite have the same capacity. I promised a software architecture slide. This is the one I will do my best to gloss over very quickly because, as I said in my preamble, unlike our Google colleagues here, I am in no way a technical specialist. But what I want you to understand is that there are forecasting services, there are risk transfer services. These are all inputs. We have external data sources, whether it's GLOFASS, whether it's ECMWF models, all these things come in. And ultimately, at the bottom right, you can see a happy smiley face of a user and communication channels that reach them. So we are using AI primarily at the back end in terms of the inputs to the decision support models that we expect to develop. And then primarily using sort of different socio-economic approaches, we hope to have the communication channels as effective as possible. Again, we're here to talk about early warnings for all. So we know a great deal, I think, over the last 2 days. We've learned about the different pillar leads for early warnings for all. I haven't yet. They haven't mentioned room F yet. I'm slightly disappointed. I can't see anyone with coffee though. Maybe that's the problem. All I want you to take away from this slide is that we have fairly carefully tried to map the Medusa concept, the Medusa product, the Medusa strategy onto the different early warnings for all pillars, so that we're working with colleagues at ITU, we're working with UNDRR, we're working with the Red Cross across all of these different pillars to make sure that we're being as effective as possible. Again, I think in the interest of time, I'll gloss over this slide. And there we go. So I promised I would be swift, Laurie. I mean, we have a website. We are, in terms of our socials, we are most active on LinkedIn. I think we're nudging up close to 1,000 followers after the first 6 months of the project. It's our primary avenue for interacting with our external stakeholders or any interested parties. So do please give us a follow. You'll see some interaction from Monique, from other colleagues. You'll see the presentation yesterday that is on there. Please do look at that. Thank you for your time. And Laurie, I hope that was reasonably swift.
Very. Yes, the timeliness was very appreciated, but also the content is fascinating, and we really look forward to working with you on early warnings for all. So we have 2 more presentations. Each one is just 10 minutes long, which means that we will be racing through it, but nonetheless, I hope we'll get a taste of some of the exciting work that's happening. So I'm very happy to welcome the team from Everbridge, who we know we have been in contact with before on early warnings for all. So very eager to hear about how you are enhancing 24/7 public warning alerts with chatbot technology. And the speakers are Kirsty Grant, Marketing Director for Public Safety Solutions, Robin Brinkworth, Senior Product Manager, and Lisa Aldera, who's the Software Engineer Intern. Thank you very much. You have 10 minutes.
Is this one? Ah, it's on. How exciting. So yeah, so appreciate your patience, and I promise you this will be interesting. And actually this will be probably the only session that's properly interactive, because how many people have got a mobile phone in this room? Cool. You might be able to use it at the end of this and actually see what we're talking about and actually use it. So it's worth sticking around for that. So yeah, thank you for the introduction, and thank you to ITU for inviting us to come and present on this. It's a pretty interesting topic for us. If you don't know who we are, Everbridge is a public warning software technology provider amongst many of the things that we do. And we're here today to talk about the project that we've delivered to enhance public alerts with a chatbot using artificial intelligence. So if we can skip ahead, I don't know if I've got the ability to do that. It looks like I do. Okay, let's hope I don't mess this up. Hey. Okay, so already had the introductions. My colleagues here will introduce themselves as well. I should just add that I am by no means an AI expert. So I'm really pleased that these 2 are here, because they'll be able to explain some of the more interesting aspects of this. And actually, interestingly, the director who's led this initiative wasn't able to come to the conference, but his actual name is Menno Bot. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be called a bot to develop a bot, but I guess he was born to do this. So just a quick word about the actual project. Similar to some of the others that you've seen today, we were actually part of a consortium that was funded by the European Union Project Engage. That's finished now, but you can see some of the partners that were involved in that project. So our business that is cell broadcast technology that's part of our public warning solution is actually based on a company called One-to-Many that's in the Netherlands. So it was our colleagues in the One-to-Many business that developed this prototype AI chatbot. As a company, Everbridge, we are present in over 25 countries, providing the governments in those countries with public alerting solutions. So we like to think we know what we're doing. And I think we were, very pleased to be part of this project. So this might be a familiar picture to some of you that are from countries where there are regularly crisis events, natural disasters, and what can happen is there's a flood of calls to public answering points, whether you're in a 112 or a 911 or a 999, as we are in the UK. So one of the objectives of producing an AI-enabled chatbot was to prevent this happening or to take some of the pressure off these answering points. So at this point, I'm going to hand over to Lisa, who knows a lot more about how this was built and will be able to bring it more to life. So if I hand it.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Kirsty. So, no, did I just go back? Yeah. Okay. So this is where our public warning chatbot comes in, where people can ask any questions about the emergency, and the chatbot will reply in a fast way and with accurate information so that critical information about the emergency is accessible to everyone. So there are some challenges that traditional public warning communication systems face. The most common ways of sending a public warning message are SMS or cell broadcast, as you know, which are purely text-based, and therefore there are content length limitations. So this means that the information that is available to the user about the emergency at that moment is limited to the amount of characters that can fit in a SMS or in a cell broadcast notification. So this makes it quite difficult, as you can imagine, to provide comprehensive guidance and give details about the current emergency. And therefore, people have to turn to other channels to find more about it, such as the news channel, which is not ideal, might not be ideal in an emergency situation. And also another issue is that these messages often come with 1 or 2 languages at most. So people who do not speak either of those languages basically are unreachable. Okay. So our chatbot is designed to address these challenges. It can chat with the user in real time and answer to any question about the emergency. And it can provide a lot more information that an SMS or a cell broadcast notification can. And it is also, this makes it quite easily accessible. And the fact that you also do not need to download any software to interact with the chatbot is also something that makes it quite accessible. More on that later. And the chatbot also has multi-language capabilities. So the user can ask questions about the emergency in their preferred language. This is not working. Okay, it's not. Technical issues. Okay, yeah, we got it. So if we imagine the emergency scenario of heavy rainfall causing a landslide in a certain area, we broadcast a public warning message, such as the one that you can see on the slide. But users might have more questions about the emergency. They might want to know more details, such as what to do in their specific situation, and they can ask that to the chatbot, which can provide detailed and accurate answers. And another interesting feature of the chatbot is that it can provide the user with a visual representation of where the emergency currently is. Or if the user asks where is the nearest shelter or the nearest evacuation location, the chatbot can show it on a map. And it can also tell the user how far they are from the emergency. And yeah, as I already mentioned, the chatbot supports multiple languages, and it can also help after an emergency. So the user can ask, is it safe to return to a certain location after an emergency? And the chatbot doesn't only provide text-based instructions, but it can also provide videos or images that can help during an emergency on how to prepare. And of course, these materials come from authoritative sources. yeah, we're gonna skip this in the interest of time, and we're also gonna keep this short in the interest of time. So as a high level overview, when an emergency happens, we broadcast a public warning message. So the user receives a notification on their phone, and this notification can contain the link to the chatbot. So this is how the user can start chatting with the chatbot, just by clicking on this link, which is completely optional, of course. So as I already mentioned, the user doesn't need to download any software to interact with the chatbot. Yeah, so and we use tools such as Dialogflow and ChatGPT to answer the questions from the user. We mainly use Dialogflow, which is a tool developed by Google that is used to build chatbots, and we trained it on a set of questions. But of course, there are some questions that Dialogflow cannot answer. Maybe questions that are that deviate a bit from the standard, such as, can I take the train to escape from the flood or something like that? And yeah, we use ChatGPT to provide some flexibility to our software so that we can also answer those questions. Yeah, but with ChatGPT, it can be a double-edged sword because while it is very flexible, you also need to instruct it in such a way that it answers in exactly the way you want it to. In this case, we want it to be like an emergency manager. So we craft the prompt in such a way that it only answers in ways that are related to the emergency, and when it is sure that the information is accurate, that the answer is accurate. And now I'm gonna leave the floor to my colleague, Robin.
I'll just wrap up this section and hand over. Yeah, so just in the context of early warnings for all, obviously we're part of the communication dissemination pillar 3. So I think it speaks for itself that it's actually enhancing how we support pillar 3 with communication. So yeah, we do have a white paper on the topic, so come and find me afterwards if you would like to see that. Okay, so over to my colleague, Robin.
Alrighty, so I'll try and be swift about this. I think Lisa and Kirsty have already talked a lot about the usage. The idea is that chatbots can manage that one-to-many conversation that happens and manage the many-to-one. There's a lot of interest in AI generally supporting public warning through like user workflow enhancements, and that is triaging, supporting the operators. That's one of the use cases we see for AI. Supporting during event situational awareness. I think we talked a lot about situational awareness more broadly, but during event, obviously these situations are very, very chaotic. Anything we can do to simplify information, make the user experience easier for the operator is something that we believe will support better operational responses. Obviously, there's a lot of use cases at the moment for LLMs and other ML use cases for translation capability, making sure that everyone has accessible information in their native language. The better they understand the information, the better they are able to act on that information. Some risks. This is the fun bit. This is the bit where we get into like the nitty-gritty of what is a prototype and what is a product. So there is the potential risk that our chatbot is a potential high risk use of AI under the EU definition. We're going to have to work through that as a process and work out what we can put into production, when and how we manage that process. There's a lot of implementation issues there. Guardrails and liability, right? What happens if the evacuation route is to the north and the chatbot says to go south? Who owns that liability? These are some of the problems we're working out at the moment. There's a great deal of faith in the chatbot, but we can't assume it's always going to be accurate. How we manage that risk is something that we'd be doing a lot of testing, trialing into. And if anyone wants to kind of come talk about that, we're really open to that. Another thing is also just data accessibility and usability. A lot of the chatbot relies on having basically good resources for RAG, so retrieval augmented generation, to make sure that like the instigator of the emergency communication has like high quality database for them to pull that information into the chatbot. So there's an idea that maybe more suited to more mature public warning operators. But again, pilots, countries, anyone who wants to talk to us about that, we're open to pilots. And lastly, yeah, human machine tooling. Not everyone's going to be familiar with using AI tooling, but if you've got an operator who is used to doing public warning in that sense, you know, there is a learning curve here. We're seeing that with our AI use cases. Not everyone's as familiar. And then, yeah, actually, very lastly, like latency is an issue. Like how we scale this and keep it operational. We have like massive spikes in usage that we'd anticipate from this. You'd have no usage for a 6-month period, and then it would get 200,000 hits in 4 hours or whatever, and how we manage that. So some technical things that we're kind of working out. This is currently at prototype stage, but the idea is hopefully we can take it forward. And
so this is the fun bit. So you can actually try this now for free and either scan the QR or just go into a browser and type crisis.chat. You don't need any WWs or HTTPs. And that will give you a chance to query the chatbot tool as if the user, as if you were in that scenario. And as we've said, it is a prototype. So yeah, if anybody's interested in working with us or having more of a discussion, then please come and find us afterwards. But thank you for listening.
Okay, in the meantime, good afternoon, everybody. Very happy to be here. So thank you very much for the invitation. So I have the pleasure today to share a bit what we are doing in ESA, in particular in a new program called Civil Security from Space, where we try to get, to summarize it, the right information to the right people at the right time. We have seen before, it's not obvious. Sometimes it arrives after the disaster, and sometimes you cannot even connect because everything collapses during the disaster, like computer. Is it ongoing or no? Okay. So, because in the interest of time, because unfortunately I need to take my flight straight after this, the idea of this program is the first time we have a cross-disciplinary program in ESA across navigation, Earth observation, and telecom to bring this together in order to deliver that. So we have invested in assets in CS like the Copernicus program, Galileo, and telecom. Today, there are still silos between these things. So this program tried to leverage this. So it's a federation integration of technology program to really reach this latency challenge of having information within less than 1 minute during disaster, as well as slides during session. And we just tested it before. What is it? Okay, then I go free flow. Okay, so what we, okay, good. So please, if you have any question after this, as I need to run to the airport, just drop me this, an email, or join on LinkedIn. But what I'll try to do here is to show a bit these aspects of Copilot, because Andrew Solly was mentioning we are on a satellite, which we call spaceship, if you remember this picture, beautiful, fragile. And when we are actually the pilot of this spaceship, so when you have a pilot, you need a copilot. And AI would be the best technology, in fact, today to do this. It would feed on data, so which is perfect for space agency because we have a lot of them. It would analyze them, get the insight, tell the human who hopefully take decision. That's another issue. And these decisions could actually impact the observation you need to take in order to address the problem. So you can see this as an iterative loop. So this is really the big vision where the machine would augment the human. And we have been lucky enough to live in this very exciting time where ChatGPT has demonstrated to the masses, because it was already there before, the GPT, what we can do, lowering the barrier of entry to interaction with the data by just talking to it. So you can imagine this is a mock-up, the new generation of interface to petabyte of data, where you ask questions. So where do you go? We have already this with maps. But it would compute real-time from Sentinel-2 or Planet data, the vegetation. It would compute real-time the forecast of air quality. So you would have contextual information. And if you are in the business of disaster management and you ask about, for example, a flood in Nairobi, it would map the flood, understand what are the, let's say, the settlement, compute and quantify the impact and the probability of impact, and even send information to insurance scheme to hedge the risk. So these layers exist today, they are just not integrated. Okay? And if you are a climate scientist, you could also ask, we have seen about the essential climate variables, which are the vital sign of the Earth. You could add, what's their status now? The AI would go pick the data, put them into context, and it would correlate automatically different variables to understand pattern of change like El Nino impact, not only on temperature, but on forest, etc. This is what AI does best. It's this multivariate view correlation. Caveat, easy to correlate, very difficult to interpret. You know, it's not causal relationship. So we need the scientists there still in the middle to interpret this. So we are very lucky today with the amount of data we have. Just for European Space Agency, these are the type of mission: meteorological mission for EUMETSAT, Copernicus missions for routine monitoring of the environment, weekly basis, 10-meter resolution optical radar, dedicated mission for the Earth system. We launched one last week called EarthScare, just to look at aerosol and cloud for climate change. All is good, by the way, with this mission. We just deploy the solar panel. And as you see, we really move from a static picture of the 70s to a dynamic view. So again, the AI there needs to be there because we're in the video analytics. That's just one example of Sentinel for equality. So why does it matter? We have seen it for prediction, which is the basis of early warning, that there is a disruption these days. And we have just organized a meeting about this. I'll come back later with ECMWF. Basically, most of the prediction based on physical equation have been captured through the backdoor, through the machine learning, that can now do forecasts with similar level of accuracy. This put metaphysics in crisis. So they are wondering what needs to do. They are going towards a hybrid scheme, but they are now competing with companies like DeepMind, which had nothing to do with weather forecast, or Huawei. I mean, so total change of context in less than a year. So you can imagine the disruption. It happened the same in our field Earth observation, where the value chain has been totally revisited. And most of the value is on the left side, is take the open data, augment them so that the AI can digest them. So new startups, they need to build on this. It's totally different from the traditional scheme. Most of these software are open and they tune it with the data. They can do a variety of application in inference, and then they go back and iterate with new data. And the key is what called MLOps, is the engineering of the AI. So to industrialize it. And if you want, the thing that really strikes me with this technology is totally different from the other because the paradigm is on learning. I mean, it's obvious in this conference, but it's good to recall this. So it's AI is a machine to generate software about things you don't understand by data. This is mind-blowing when you think about it. I don't understand the Earth, put the data, I get a software. I'm not happy, I put more data, I get another software. So it's an infinite production of software that we can deploy. And as I mentioned, we need the augmentation. We are not in the business of doing this in ESA. Usually we do data. Here we have to put little label, this is a tree, this is a forest, etc. So how do we do that? We need to ask people. So we did a crowdsourcing tool for gamification here, where you have cross correlation between people to check accuracy of labeling, and we released that data set. And I mentioned to you that it's really, AI is like popcorn. I mean, if you have one takeaway message, is this one. You don't see anything, and suddenly you have the explosion, Precambrian explosion. Another takeaway is that the space sector itself is disrupted, like is the one of weather forecast. If you look at the Tesla, you could see a car, but some people see a robot in there, because the value of this thing is the intelligence in the software, the fact that they function as a fleet, gathering observation, creating a 3D version of the world called a digital twin. So they see the car, but the thing is the software. We see a satellite, but the thing will be that if we empower the satellite with the software, we can have a different type of satellite, software defined, and I will come back to that because this is the key to latency for disasters. Caveat again, AI is good, but okay, it creates deep fake, big risk of misinterpretation. This is not a city. At the same time, you create fake scenario of the future, so you can educate people on what climate change can do. And you can also create synthetic data that can then feed the AI. So you see always plus and minus. ChatGPT has shown the speed of uptake, impressive. The GPT-4o integration, multimodal, GPT-5, totally different quantum change. Just this speed again. An example a bit like before, we did a chatbot to talk to disaster, to flood. You have a flood image, it's computer vision, it understands what's in it, put it in the context of the web news so that you get an intelligence report. There should be the website somewhere on this slide. If not, flood brain, yes. So you can check that. So at the beginning, because we are late in space with AI, I mean, we have a delay 6-7 years compared to the big bang of computer vision. We see this in the number of publications, but the tradition was to do one AI per scheme, one for classification, one for text, and etc. And to get different application for this, like you see here. And the new model is, we've talked about, foundation model. You do meta learning with everything, and you become specialized. It's like if you go to the gym and start doing mobility resistance, and then you become better in your sport. So we are looking at this also with a lot of partners, and that enables fast learning with a few shots. So it's totally disruptive. You just need a few data to classify. So very quickly here you see classification of clouds, beating our traditional algorithm just because it keeps learning. And in particular on the edge case, when you have shadow or snow, you create a specific annotation for this and it improves. Another mind-blowing thing is data fusion, is the fact that the machines see the world different than us, called embedding. So they can see a radar data in an optical space. And that's a totally new way to put things together. Because before we were putting optical product, radar product, we put them together. Here you fuse in that space and that scales. And that also enables to fill the holes when you have clouds, for example, with the representation of the image. That also enables, once you have understood what's in the image, to enhance the resolution. And we are having a workshop right now in ESA on this, because you can increase the resolution from 10 meters to 2.5. Very dangerous because you can have a lot of bullshit there because it can be a deep fake. So the key question is, how do you put metric to really understand how good it is? And there is a benchmarking exercise currently ongoing. But you can imagine that if with software you can upgrade this, we could revisit the whole archive and create more value for the asset. Check this website. It's about a revisited version of Sentinel-2. You Google it, you find it on GitHub. The other aspects is acceleration of prediction with digital twin. You can also check that one. And we discussed this in ESRIN this month with ECMWF. We will issue a report about the state of where we stand with physical prediction versus machine learning and the integration. So keep this website and it will keep you posted on the thing. And now comes the talk. So I'm talking about these aspects for crisis now. The vision of the new program of ESA is, as I mentioned before, we have already existing assets in space. Today, they are not connected. And they are not smart with AI. What we want to do is to connect them with telecom, example, optical link. This is coming right now. Connect them to phone. There is a revolution of satellite to phone, which will totally bypass the ground segment. It's happening right now. Apple has something, but one direction. There are technology which enables both direction. There are also technology which enables Bluetooth from space that we are looking at for early warning. So very exciting moment in the integration. with the idea to have also orbiting computing that would enable, if you want, orbiting brain for the satellite that don't have any software, so that you would upgrade the whole capability by federation. So this is what we try to achieve, and we need your help for this. So please reach out to us. We place, to do that, ESA plays contract with industry to do things. One of them is Smart Connect. It's creating a software layer for having different telecom system during disaster so that you would move seamlessly from one to the other. This came up because one of the guys in the consortium went to help during the earthquake in Turkey using Starlink, and suddenly Starlink was cut and there was no option. So people take for granted that everything works until it doesn't work. And that's really important because that's happened a lot. And in disaster, we cannot afford this. So this would be a kind of booking.com of bandwidth, if you want. And we are illustrating this on different use cases, in particular fire in Portugal. So we have an IoT, which is a camera looking at the fire. You get an early warning within less than 2 minutes. There are drones going up, but when the fire becomes big, you have smoke, the network collapses, they cannot talk to each other. So the firemen do not get data. They cannot even exchange video at this moment, interestingly enough. So we really want to upgrade these firemen to the new generation of connected firemen with situational awareness, ability to talk to each other with high bandwidth and to talk to machine. This is a bit the vision of how we want to inject all these technologies in the game. We also work with ISI, which is a new space company leading in Europe, with radar for flood, 24 countries operation. And the vision of AI on board the satellite to be fast is that you have apps, and along the orbit, you run different apps, like on a phone. And these apps could be upgraded. So it's a software-defined satellite, like the Tesla. So the other message, and I'm finishing. And this is a bit the Swiss knife approach to space. So we demonstrated this on the floods and also on methane, the ability to see something with one satellite, tell the other satellite, do something else. So you start gaining swarm intelligence in the system. This is a bit what we want to do. And just to conclude, I only talk mainly about AI and observation, but it has to be seen in a context of technology, which, by the way, are all interacted. So the convergence is there that would accelerate the speed. For example, the computing here is just to make AI run on this at the edge, or quantum is to make AI run on unsupervised learning because you have multiverse. So all these technology, in fact, interfere. Also, blockchain is the ability for agents to talk to each other with smart contract. So it's a very exciting moment, I think, we are in, and need your help to define the tomorrow and the day after tomorrow, in particular with this ability to have situational awareness in disaster. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pierre, and great. Thanks for highlighting, just the level of disruption, but also I think what we always need to keep in mind, the importance of connectivity for all of these things also to work. And also I think really important, what you mentioned, the direct to device. I mean, there's a lot of different opportunities, technological breakthroughs that will make a big change, especially in countries that are, I think, not yet, where we don't have connectivity, and where I think these satellite systems, will make a huge difference. And I think we just really look forward to working with you, specifically in the countries where we are now starting to implement early warnings for all, to see how we can, pilot and use these applications. Thank you very much. Okay, you're fully equipped. I just hope you don't miss your plane. Thanks. Okay, so we are now moving to the next session, which so the next segment is going to be a little bit more interactive. The main objective for us is to look at some of the gaps. Sorry. Yes. Yeah. No, but so before we get there, so the next session is about gaps
First, some of the financing gaps that we see. And I just got back from Antigua, where we have the Small Island Developing States Conference. And was interesting because they adopted the Antigua action plan for the Small Island Developing States. And obviously, early warnings for all was mentioned. The importance of financing, the lack of finances was mentioned, and also the importance of AI. So all the things we're talking about here today. So now we will hear not about an AI application, but about how we can actually fund these applications. And happy to have with us today Dr. Bapun Fakhruddin, who's water and climate leader from the Green Climate Fund. And nothing happens without the Green Climate Fund, including for early warnings for all. And really happy to have you here. And thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much. May I have
I hope we have your presentation?
Yep.
It's working.
Okay. So good evening. Maybe this is for everyone, and I think I saw everyone is actually get exhausted. But I think at the end of the day, we are actually looking for where is the money. We all are here, and all this entrepreneur and enthusiastic sector are actually showing their innovative ideas, how we can actually bring into the country for making a transformational changes. For climate action or disaster risk reduction. That's maybe the everyone expectation. So thanks for inviting me. So I'll be trying to share some of the mechanism that the Green Climate Fund actually put together to how the country can access financing and how it can be some of the private sector could come and play a critical role, and what kind of enabling environment we created to de-risking any kind of risk that in the market for local entrepreneur or big partner who are actually playing a critical role. Obviously, when you're looking at the aspect of the climate change or disaster, it's just very complex and cascading and compounding. And it describes us with this multi-dimensional aspect that we need actually powerful tools to unpack or understand this criticality, because with a human brain, we cannot actually be able to understand more than two-dimensional. So when it comes to the more than two-dimensional, you need some additional support. And where actually we are discussing today how actually AI could help us, how the technology could help us to better understand. And GCF is a partnership organization. We work through our partners. We have more than 207 partners whom we call our accredited entity. But also we understand that if you want to create a climate action or impact into the community in a long-term sustainable way, a grant-based solution is not enough. And when you actually, everyone is talking about the private sector come and need to play a critical role, what kind of enabling environment you can provide so that actually they can come and invest? It's like buying a share. You'll not buy a share unless you see the market is actually completely safe for you or profitable. The same like private sector. They will not come and invest anything in your country unless they see there is a profit margin, because they cannot invest their money, with a high risk. So what kind of catalytic instrument you need to provide? And that's where actually GCF play a critical role to crowdsourcing the money, as well as actually creating a catalytic financing to the country to scaling up activities. So as we said, we are a country driven. So because our major role is actually to implement the Paris Agreement. So we work through the UNFCCC NDC process. So NDC set up the overarching guidelines, and then from there on, you understand what are the climate-related risk or climate-related hazard, what it creates risk, and then what are the NAP process, which is like a national adaptation plan. And based on the NAP, you create your investment plan, which actually then country comes to throw the partner that how they can actually access some of the climate financing. And climate finance is a little bit different than the development finance, because we need to look at what are the incremental changes the climate change is actually bringing into the development, so that we can ensure that we actually cover that particular component, not the whole infrastructure or whole activities. So that's one of the critical element here. And also why we are saying that we are a catalytic financing, because we just not only give a grant or a project to the country, we provide, we have a new readiness strategy for every single developing country, which means the country can access up to $4 million for 4 years to build their capacity. It could be any kind of capacity. It could be a policy, it could be a plan, it could be a incubator, what we are actually demonstrating today through various countries, because these are a small scale, you just test in as a test bed. And if you see this as a success, you actually bring as a scaling up for the whole country. And the purpose of this $4 million actually to support countries so that actually they can access to the larger financing. So our larger finance start with a minimum $25 million, which is like a small scale. Medium scale is ticket size is around $50 to $70 million. And large scale, there is no upper limit. We have a example of designing or giving a project of $1.5 billion, one country in South Africa. So that kind of example we have. So you can looking at the scalability is quite high to how actually you create greater impact. And as well as it's a high risk taking organization. So we try to find actually what are the critical element that the private sector or other investor actually having difficulties to bring or coming to an investment. And that's why we try to introduce all sort of instrument, highly concessional loans, so that sector can actually able to borrow 0% interest rate up to 40 years return period. Some of the water utility or infrastructure by the public sector required highly concessionality. So we can go up to 0% concessionality. We can also provide a guarantor. If a private sector thinks that, okay, there is a high risk of loss or sort of lapse of the financing, we can actually take those kind of fast loss guarantor. We can also create an equity fund so that actually there is a regular money flow within the community so that it can sustain. And as well as there are insurance and other elements is there. So that's why we are saying that we are a highly risk-taking organization, and as well as it has a balance. So we have a mitigation, 50% mitigation and 50% adaptation, so that we try to balance the whole activities for a climate action perspectives. So now, if you look at this angle, that where actually we see it as a green climate fund, and why actually we are telling that we are quite unique. Because there are DFIs, there are MDBs, there are philanthropy. Everyone is actually have a bucket of money and they're actually playing a critical role. So if you look at the average ticket size for us, we actually sitting on the middle, which is like a 50 to 70 million, as I said. But when you're looking at the risk angle, we're also actually sitting on a very middle side. Because we have all sort of financial instrument. You can go to the MDBs. They can only provide you two elements. Either you take loan or you take TA, but there is not so many other instruments there. Philanthropy is quite high because they have money, but they are actually, the average ticket size is not so big for the country level. And then, as you maybe hear that our executive director has been announced recently that she like to mobilize $50 billion by 2030, and our major target is actually to reach to the most vulnerable conflict in those countries. And also how we can actually maximize the private sector investment, because as alone GCF or alone a DFI or MDB will not be able to solve the climate crisis or amount of money we need. And also how we actually create a partnership, because this particular session actually is so quite interesting. Actually, many of us doing the similar things, but how we can actually leverage those things so that actually rather than duplication, we try to create some more deeper dive with a partnership, which are missing link, and how we can actually improve those kind of things. That could be a possibility. And also how we can actually simplify the country to access, because there is often a notion that we are very, very complex because our due diligence process is very, very high. So how we can actually make a more need-based solution or country-specific project we can actually create, because in the past we used to do one size fit all. So if we compare with a seed country like St. Martin or Guyana, and if you compare with India, it doesn't actually fit together. So we need to make that kind of purpose-driven solution, and also how we can actually make a more systematic solution into the market so that there is a continuation or long-term sustainability. So now when we come to the early warning for all, or climate information and early warning systems, as per our new next strategy, which is like 2024 and 2027, we need to cover at least 50 countries should be protected or improve their climate information and early warning systems. So that's our mandate for to improving or enhancing the early warning for all initiatives by the Secretary General. So that means actually we have to develop at least 40 plus project over the next 4 years. And generating that level of project is not so easy. So that's why you move to a more programmatic approach, that how we can actually bring all these early warning partners, like especially to the 4 pillars, to work together and bringing a programmatic approach so that we can actually, at a time, mobilize some bigger financing. And then as a first initiatives, $157 million actually announced by our ED in La Sunga, which is under process for approved by the board in the coming board meeting. And we also try to look at, and when we're looking at the early warning or AI for early warning systems, we still actually quite heavily driven on the top level, which is like a modeling, data, or hazard assessment. But if you look at the most challenging part, it's actually at the community level, because who are the most vulnerable. So how can actually we create more hyper-local information? How can you generate a more scenario-based impact information so that a farmer could understand that, okay, if there is a 1 meter flood, it means actually 30% loss of my crops, or I should actually switch to crop paddy to watermelon if there is no water, or how can I create a market opportunity? Can AI provide those information? Is there a possibility? I think there is possibility, because we do those kind of process-driven thinking. So if human can do those process-driven thinking, AI can actually put those together into a scenario-based modeling, so that actually farmers or community, they understand what are the options they have and how they can actually make the decision with their historical understanding or with their beliefs. And that's where it fits actually how we look at more on the value chain, and all the value chain, how those AI or more advanced technology could be fit in to better understand. Just looking at the communication presentation, you can do a cell broadcasting for 1 million people for a tsunami warning, for an example, but maybe 500 people actually didn't get any warning because they don't have a mobile, or their mobile was switched off, or maybe it's dead. So how AI can actually able to articulate those kind of findings and find an alternative, so that actually there is a mechanism in place to let them know that there is something is coming. So that's why we want to see a transformational change into an early warning system for all, or early warning system, climate information and early warning system. And also as a fund, we like to see an early warning system is not only just for saving lives and reduce the damage of the property. Our target is actually how an early warning system could be enable Minister of Finance in every country a risk-based budgeting, so that the sector can actually have a risk-based decision-making culture and budget based on the future risk, and how that could be enable them to creating a loss and damage, because there is a new finance has been came in the market, and people need to understand what is their loss and damage. And if they don't have a proper loss and damage data, archiving, or calculation system, they'll not be able to come up with any rationale how actually they get compensated. So that's where actually we like to see an early warning system could support at the last end. And then finally, GCF investment also has a little bit unique in a sense of investment criteria. So one of our biggest criteria is actually how much impact a dollar actually we are investing to the community. But the reason here the AI and advanced technology fit is, which is like a paradigm shift, that how we actually think differently, what actually we never did in the past, or how we can actually do better way to doing things what we never did. And it's not only just financial transformation, or it also actually how you bring the innovation. And that's why I think this particular conference, or the partner who are here demonstrating so many good product fit to sell those country, giving an understanding of how the country can come with a recipient need, which is like a need-based solution by the country, and as well as promote a country ownership. And it shows an effectiveness and efficiency for the country to scalable activities. And if anyone is like to, this is the last slide. So if anyone like to access to the financing, we run through our sector guides. So we have every sector guides, and we like to see AI should be applied for all sector, not only for early warning, for all. And feel free to reach any of those guidance to look at, and if you want to access the GCF financing. So with these things, I just like to thank everyone for listening. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I think so much great information and very, very useful also for us. As you mentioned, we're working with so many private sector partners, and it's really important also for us to understand how we can then actually, move from the models to piloting in the countries, and how that financing can work. And maybe we can do a bit more of a deep dive there also. And also just to highlight, I think we've seen that today also that, we need more for the community level. And this is something I think, again, was reflected in the presentations here. And we really have to see how AI can benefit the communities. Thank you so much. With this, I would like to ask my other pillar leads, colleagues here to the podium. Yeah, Adam, you're great. Because so the next, our last sort of part, which is followed by an interactive, like a breakout session, is about gaps, still gaps, not financing gaps, but now actually implementation, operationalization gaps. So what we did as sort of the 4 pillars of the Early Warning for All initiative is we came up with a few ideas on the gaps that we see in terms of implementation and gaps where we are thinking and we're hoping that AI can help. And so what we would like to do is very quickly have a very short presentation on these, the 4, you all know, I think, the 4 pillars of the Early Warning for All initiative, and to see how we can, the key gaps that we see in those areas. And happy to have with me here today, Erica, Adam, and Justin from IFRC, UNDRR, WMO, and of course ITU. So just, lots of colors and squares. This is just to show, and I think we heard about this already this morning, it's what we really need to focus is on the areas where AI is the most useful, some areas where maybe only AI can help us solve some of the challenges. And I think this is really important. And with this, I am moving to Adam, pillar 1.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody who's left. We've done a little discussion inside the Pillar 1 group, trying to identify some of the places where we think that there are potential solutions for AI to contribute in processes related to, in Pillar 1, the sort of gathering of risk information. What does the country or what does a community know about itself before we get to the case of an observation or warning? And there are definitely some challenges relating to speed or quality. And I'll very quickly sort of describe these. We talk about impact projections. One of the big challenges is related to sort of understanding what will happen when an event occurs. So in the case of a heat wave, for example, how are agri-food systems potentially impacted, going from producers and shipping and food safety and quality and price, and all of these dimensions are really hard to sort of very quickly calculate. So that, I think, is one of the dimensions. Or how would a health system be stressed in the case of a drought-induced cholera outbreak? How many more nurses would be needed, or how many more clinics would be needed per square kilometer? This kind of calculation is really difficult to do at speed, but the kind of thing that models could be trained to do, I think. Impact completion. We have sort of spotty data when it comes to disaster impact. Bapan was talking about the impact side of things. We have country level data, we have global level data, but there's a very muddy middle where language barriers may be complemented with AI solutions. Scenario modeling. So we're very good on some kinds of hazards like floods and seismic events, but things like heat waves and storms and wildfires are really a lot more difficult to model. So I think there's a big possibility there. Use a completion image. The next set, I guess, is related to socioeconomic impact based on climate projections. So if we know that floods are this bad today and floods are going to be this bad in the future or much worse in the future, okay, but what are the other dynamics? How are cities changing? How is the sewage system going to adapt in the next 50 years, also in relation to the increased flood risk and the other dimensions that we're not sort of putting into the same category? Data on exposed land and assets. We're quite good on buildings and land. As you saw, lots of good examples of sort of delineating farms or identifying where buildings are. But we don't have things like blending in seasonal crop calendars and a watermelon in June versus a watermelon in December in a crop, or building material or the age of infrastructure. All of these things are really valuable when it comes to anticipating how a hazard is going to affect a community, but we don't have them integrated into the systems, into the models. The data exists. We haven't flowed it into it yet. And it's difficult to do for humans. Stress testing critical infrastructure. This, I think, is one that Chris and Paul were talking about. You know, different wind speeds on cell broadcasting towers have potentially different effects, which have, again, knock-on effects. Or the depth of water on a gravel road over 2 weeks has a different sort of modelable output. Trading route analysis, how many cars can evacuate on a given bridge at a given speed, or how many liters of sewage are not being pumped out when a particular plant goes down. And lastly, I think the more obvious ones, sort of parsing language when it comes to developing potentially impact plans or mitigation plans. This is something where across languages we could have sort of inspiration drawn from Bolivia to Philippines, where you have sort of both countries developing plans, but not necessarily having the same structure to do it. Obviously, digitalization. There are millions and millions of community-based risk maps, hand-drawn or handwritten records of past impact or things like this, that digitalization is a massive opportunity. And lastly, obviously, in translation, not just in relation to sending messages, but also understanding what a country or what a community knows about itself. If it's in a language that we are not globally capable of internalizing, that's a big opportunity to understand, I guess, what the possibilities are in the translation side, on the in side. Over to you, Erica.
Great, thank you so much. I will be very brief. Okay, so yeah. Yes, so in terms of detection, monitoring, analysis, and forecasting of hazards, we've already heard a lot about this today. So maybe I might actually lead off with something a bit more provocative. I think there's the saying, is the treatment worse than the cure? So I think we should also consider some of the impacts of AI in terms of the cost. There is a substantial cost involved in training the models, which I think is great in terms of partnering with the private sector. They're really happy to bear this cost, and I do appreciate that. But I think in terms of, you know, the benefit aspect, I think we just want to make sure that it's, you know, there's an equitable return. So I think there's that. And I think we also have to recognize that there's a tremendous amount of energy involved in processing all of this information. And so I think in terms of the carbon emissions, we really have to focus on what is the biggest impact. So we did actually look in terms of within our technical commissions, because WMO is a standard setting organization. We asked them the question, and the services department is still kind of thinking about it. But there's tremendous opportunity, and there's so many different communities at risk. You know, it needs to be a people-centered approach. So we really kind of have to better understand, you know, what is happening, the dynamics at a very small scale, to really reach the people in a way that they can, you know, understand, receive, and not only that, but act. There's got to be a means to act. So I think that's also a really important component. So we asked the technical commissions, and so they really are putting a lot of focus in terms of AI-based nowcasting. There's really a gap, and there's a lot of data that's required for doing nowcasting. And so we're looking at how we can maybe partner on that. Of course, there's let me see, I think AI tools. Oh yes, in terms of downscaling and processing some of the NWP and different products. So you really are getting to the scale that it's meaningful information being provided. And then also verification. I think there was a lot of people that kind of highlighted on this, how well are models doing? You know, are there outliers? Where there are data gaps? You know, how can we actually fill in some of those elements? And then for visualization, I kind of already touched on that in our opening remarks or my opening statement. So I think that we're really excited and we're very happy to be partnering, with a number of different agencies, not just the private sector. But I'm excited to explore maybe some more of these items in the breakout group. And then, of course, cross-cutting areas. I think that Vanessa, you're going to kind of cover some of the ITU elements, but of course, impact-based forecasting remains a tremendous challenge for us. And there's a lot of variable quality, I would say, in terms of some of the impact data sets. And so I really would like to focus some energy on that. So thank you all very much.
Thank you very much. So in terms of the pillar 3, the main question we have, or one of the main questions, is which communication channels can be used to reach people at risk? Because we know pillar 3 is all about, once we know something is happening, we have a message that we want to bring to people. And so the question is, what is the best way to reach people? What is the best communication channel? And here, if we look at the top right, we need to understand who is covered by digital networks. And I think we had a really good presentation today by Chris and Paul, understanding we have data. I'm convinced we have all the data we need today to actually understand who is covered by digital networks, who can be reached by mobile phones, who can be reached by other communication channels. It's just a matter of bringing this information together. And so, hopefully AI can also help play a role in that. But also, of course, we need to look at the hard to reach communities, those that are not covered by digital channels. And that is really useful because there we can say either we make investments and we cover them with digital channels, but that also implies they would have to have either mobile phones or other ways of communication, or we need to look at alternative communication channels, sirens, or rely on radio, television, other communication channels. So for us, this is really critical information. And so again, we're not just looking at where are people covered, but what we're actually interested in, and we saw this again in the presentation earlier, is we are interested at the people that are in at-risk areas, and those are the ones we want to reach. Another thing that's very interesting for us is to see how resilient is infrastructure. And this goes a little bit back also to the, the risk assessments, because you need to understand how risky is it to rely on certain communication channels. You want to know how resilient it is. So, we would like to have some measures of infrastructure resilience and backup. Also, one other thing that's interesting, and that's sort of learning from experience. We would like to know, how did people act up on previous alerts? Did they act? And so one way would be to track how many people acted up on alerts using different methods to see, for example, in an at-risk area where people were alerted, how many people actually left that area. So, just again, throwing out some ideas that for us would be really, really useful information to have, and just, I think, to build better pillar 3, applications and services. Finally, also, we need to make sure that we have consistent and understandable warning messages. So again, did people understand the message they received? Was it useful to them? And here, one of the things that has come up a bit today is also AI to translate alerts and messages. I think that has huge potential, because in many countries, it's not 1 or 2, it's many more languages. And I think that would be a huge opportunity. But also we can look at user profiling and sentiment analysis, just to understand the people that we're actually serving, that we want to reach, to understand those people much better. So that's it from pillar 3. Handing over to Justin.
Okay, thanks so much. Thanks, Vanessa. Thanks, Eric. And thanks, Adam. Good afternoon or good evening to all of you. Thanks for staying. So I'm Justin Giannetti from IFRC. And as Vanessa just alluded to, when we talk about end-to-end early warning systems, there are people in the system. There's people at the end of the day. It's about people taking, the desired, hopefully effective, appropriate action. And one of the areas that we thought about, one of the opportunities we thought that AI would be potentially useful would be really in just having a better understanding of the people in the system. How do people behave, particularly in response to what kinds of messages and signals. So there's quite a bit of overlap between what we identified from Pillar 4 and some of the things that Vanessa just mentioned. And on that note, just for those of you who are new or newish to the early warnings for all, you may be wondering, why are there these things like checklists? Why are you seeing the word checklist on the slide, on our slides? To us, it's like the water we swim in. But we have a lot of the material and the guidance that we're generating is to speak to governments. And one of the things that we realized when we were reviewing the materials for Pillar 4 was, sorry, let me back up a second. So what we did initially as a group was we went through the checklist for the governments to triage and say, okay, which things in the checklists are probably most amenable or appropriate for using AI to help address. And then as we reviewed that in the Pillar 4 group over the last few weeks, we realized actually our checklist is probably not quite right, because we independently thought of many other opportunities to bring AI in to speak to things that aren't included in the checklist. So for example, if governments are putting in place policies and standard operating procedures before events occur, we can use AI and large language models to sort of optimize those policy developments and or at least to identify gaps in those policies, or to help make sure that those policies are speaking to the right needs. So I think that's what I would probably end on for Pillar 4. It's that this was a good opportunity for us to also identify sort of what's currently missing from our own outreach within that pillar to the rest of the governments.
Turn off so I can turn on. Thank you very much. So I had a thought, which happens once in a while, and that is we were supposed to go out into breakout groups now, but I'm just wondering, given the time we have left, which is about 15 minutes, by the time we all go into little corners and group together, I'm afraid half of that time would already be over. So what I would like to suggest is maybe we can have sort of a bit more of a discussion, also see if there's other questions. And please, maybe not just to us, but also other speakers who are still in the room. Bapon's there, for example. Other speakers are here still to see whether there's, any sort of questions or comments, feedback or ideas, thoughts from your side. Is that okay? Okay, great. And so the question shouldn't be just for us, so it shouldn't be us just answering it.
Yeah, hello. Thanks, Vanessa. It's actually for Bapon. So it's kind of linked to the session that we presented earlier on the chatbot, which is a kind of an innovation, a prototype, and it's obviously not the only one in the world of AI. There's a lot of innovation and things that are at prototype or concept stage. I'm curious to know if there's a model for funding those kinds of innovations to help them move from concept to real world usage.
Thank you so much. I show you in my investment criteria, one of the major investment criteria is actually need-based and country-driven. So if you see there is a prospect or an opportunity for any of your model to support climate action, and there is a buy-in by the government, they can always actually come to GCF financing. And as we said, the scale of the financing is quite large in GCF. So when you're looking at a $50 million project, and if you're talking about a modeling, which is actually not even $1 million, so it actually goes very under the radar. But more often, actually, we provide those kind of financing through the readiness, or when actually the project actually packaging, we also provide a $1.5 million project preparation fund, which required to come up with the evidence that there is a climate rationality, climate impact on it. And that money could be also used for those kind of modeling that you're talking for. So there are different avenues depending on scale But end of the day, it need to be buy-in by the government and come to the GCF. Thanks.
Forgive me. John Cox, WMO, BAPON. I'm just going to follow up on what Kirsty said there. I mean, both the Everbridge example we heard from Kirsty and her colleagues and the Medusa project that I presented are both funded by the European Union. One key mechanism that aligns both of those is it's fixed term funding. There's 3 years worth of funding to develop, in the Medusa case, something which is at a certain technology readiness level. So we have funding to produce a product. We then have a product which is ready to go, but we have no more funding to try and implement it at a country level or a international level. Can you perhaps share again, if there's anything else that you haven't covered, how GCF can help fill those gaps?
Thanks a lot. The one of the interesting aspect in GCF financing is that it's a very flexible financing. So we don't finance for 3 years or 5 years. Our average financing is 7 years, and it could go up to 10 years as well. So that gives a little bit time for country to actually to adopt or actually bringing to the transition for sustainability. And that's one of the things that you bring here, actually the product that you bring into the market, and then how that could be sustained through a long-term capacity building. And that's why actually we try to introduce those other instruments. If a private sector like Evergreen like to come and invest their money, we can take a whole guarantor for their money so that they can keep continue. And if there is an opportunity for a med service or disaster management offices or climate change offices to see a investment to an opportunity where is actually return of investment, they could actually use those kind of long-term highly concessional loan, so which is like a 0% up to 30 years, so that you have actually continuation of the product use at the different scale or different sector to find a business opportunity. But in those kind of cases, you have to show a clear evidence of the business case scenario that if you say that, okay, first 7 years, you'll be lost because of the product generation, capacity building, marketing, we are willing to offer you those losses, first loss guarantor, whatever loss comes. And then you say that, okay, the number 7 years, you come to a level 0, but you need to show that actually 8 to 10 years, you have a 3%, 5%, and incremental profit margin. And that's show a quite trend of productivity and progress. And we can actually take care of those kind of losses or guarantor or anything in that particular phase, or create equity funding, depending on what kind of instrument the country like to utilize.
Hi, Nilay Doğulu. Can you hear me? Consultant WMO. I was a modeler in my earlier times of career, hydrologist. AI, of course, clustering algorithms, earlier speakers used, so well done. But now, having jumped into the policy space, connecting to Erica's comment on the energy impact, there is also the water impact. So the water required to cool the processors is a must thing that we should be aware of. If in a future scenario where there will be not too much water scarcity, energy scarcity, how much should we invest in technology which would require energy and water? So, and also another aspect, then in our hydro models, we should be able to represent that water usage to be able to have better predictions. So then is it an endless loop? And the financiers, what project they should prioritize in terms of funding? So I'm a little bit confused and would be happy to hear those opinions which might offer a solution. Thank you.
Well, I mean, so I think probably everyone has a perspective on this, but really a brief one from me. I think what we're trying to do is to triage and identify sort of like where are the biggest opportunities. So rather than like refining something to the nth decimal point, where are the low hanging fruit that will have the biggest impact? And we probably don't know yet what those are, but that's the point of the interpillar collaboration, I would say.
Maybe just overall, and this is also something ITU is very involved in, we sort of, we do a cost benefit analysis to understand, what's the negative environmental impact and what's the positive impact. With AI now, it's very difficult, of course, and we can't really we can sort of see a correlation, growth of energy use and water. We know it uses a lot of water, but I think what we really, in the end, what we will need is clear figures to show this is the positive impact and this is the negative impact. And only then can we actually decide this is a good investment, yes or no. So this is something I think, Gavin, you had a.
Thanks a lot. Gavin White from the REAP, Risk Informed Reaction Partnership. I'm happy to see all my colleagues with this great presentation. We're very involved in Earning for All, and I just want to thank all the presenters today on the tech side, because it's been amazing, such a rich discussion covering so much ground. It feels like I need a PhD to grasp everything that was discussed there and probably miss most of it. I wanted to raise one point, which is probably for further discussion with our tech partners moving forward, which is, and I'll kind of break it down to 4 aspects that it made me think of on how we roll out technology. The first thing on the bots, I think it's a great idea, but every time I call my bank and they send me to a bot, I just hang up and I go to my bank because it's just down the road. So there's a behavioral component that we need to factor in. What do people use? How do they use it? Again, I'm not saying it's not part of the answer, but there are many aspects to it. A second piece is on we've done amazing. I spent 20 years in DR doing community-based work, amazing mapping of the hazards. We go to people, tell them, you're going to get flooded. Yes, but that's where I have my fields. Yes, this is but where I go fishing. I'm not moving. So it's all the behavioral components of how do we factor that in. The information, we have it. It's not an issue of information. It's information of what are the blockages to individual behaviors. Hazard awareness. A hurricane hit Trinidad and Tobago in 2018. We had all the best systems in place. We told everyone they knew what to do. No one followed the orders. They all rushed to the schools to get their kids. Again, behaviors. What is it that means that people are actually incorporating? You can tell them all the right things to do, but they're going to go and save what is the most important for them. So again, how do we factor that into the tech discussions? And maybe just a last example, when I was doing an evaluation post-hurricane in the Caribbean, and the main response, 95% satisfaction, the concern that people were raising is, but nowadays, volunteers, they don't even talk to us. They just look at their phone and they're entering data. Why don't they just engage with us and see how we can speak about our trauma? How can we work together to rebuild our community? Tech is part of the solution, but it has to be incorporating all the behavioral components. That means that this will lead to the next step. So I just want to continue the discussion because I think this is really part of the future, but it's a part of the future. Thank you.
Maybe just one comment there, because, I'm as pillar 3, we're obviously, it's all about technology and we promote this, but I think it's exactly that component, and that, we must make sure that, for me, it's, the pillar 4, the communities, that component is really, becomes part of that, and that the technologies benefit those communities and not, and don't run in parallel. I don't know, Justin, yeah.
Maybe very quickly on this. So one idea we've just begun batting around on is kind of using technology to revise how we do data collection and assessments. So rather than just, as you just said, people going in and using Kobo, form filling, you can use, you can just ask people open-ended questions and ask them to tell you their stories. And then you can use like a large language model to turn unstructured data into structured data. And you actually just have a conversation with someone and then you make them feel heard while you're actually collecting the data. So it's something that and you can actually speak to them in their own language. You don't have to convert everything into, one of the main dominant languages in the country. Early days, but this is like one idea we've begun betting around.
Yeah.
Oh. Yeah, and Stephanie, if you want to chat with me too. Well, Stephanie and I were just talking, having kind of the same conversations about, in technology companies, we have all this access to all this tech and it's really nice. But what we're constantly asking is how this can be used, And I think your point on behavior is a really good one. I think one of the things that we tried to do in what we were showing, particularly in Ethiopia, is that we should be working directly with the government to implement behavior-based solution and policy, that we don't do things just because we can for tech, but that it has a clear impact. So I don't know, Stephanie, if you have to add.
No, I was going to say +1 to that. As soon as you said the piece about behavior and how everybody's just going to rush to school to pick up their kids anyway, and they're not necessarily going to follow that guidance, is such important information and something that should be baked into it. So if you know they're going to do that, well, how can you include your advice in that, right? Hey, not in so much an obvious way of like, oh, we know you're going to do this anyway, but just more of a, when you do this, please be aware of these things, right? So whether it's road closures or whatever it may be for something they're already going to do, I think is really important insight, and having that on the ground information and feeding that back up is really helpful. If not, we'll build everything and it's cool and it's great, but actually how is it therefore impacting the communities on the ground who are truly being affected?
And if I may as well, so before working for ITU, I was working for the Belgian government in establishing the public warning system, and that's a full part of the work, which is building the trust and building the culture of risk and alert. And that's totally embedded within the different pillars here, because just for giving an idea, at the start of the public warning system in Belgium, no one believed that. 7 years after, if there's something that happened and no one received a message, they are questioning the government. Why haven't you sent us a message? Why haven't you protect us? So it's actually something that should go with the different product and services we developed, but it's certainly not forgotten and very useful.
This is great because Amelie now works for ITU, so it's all going to be integrated into the early warnings for.
Hi, I'm Barnaby Willits-King from the GSMA. I'm glad I stayed to this point because it's just the last few comments have been really the things that I've been wanting to sort of hear about and talk about in terms of community engagement. Just to say, the mobile industry is very committed to supporting early warning systems, and we made a pledge as the industry at COP. But I think the issues that have come out in the last sort of half hour about community engagement, building trust, kind of communicating are things that I think the opportunities that you identified on the slides I thought were really useful, because I think they were sort of highlighting that we haven't heard so much about that end of the spectrum, and I think there are opportunities, particularly around you know, language, which has come up quite a lot, I think really important, who we don't reach, how do we communicate, all of that kind of stuff. And then just to say, obviously I would, infrastructure resilience, so important. We need to think about that a lot more and where we can use AI on that. Thanks.
Any other questions? One other thing, I just wanted to apologize because we had a demonstration from Violet from Seed Studios, and I hope some of you were able to look at the demonstration. If not, maybe just after you can still do so. And we were supposed to have that in the break, and with the shift that sort of got lost a little. I apologize, but I saw some people standing with you there, so that's great. I think we're running out of time, and maybe just a few sort of closing words from my side. Anything else from? You're good. Okay. So I think our main objective today was a bit, you know, to get people excited about what's happening, and I think everyone's done a really good job at doing that. I think we saw a lot of exciting applications. Yeah, and squeaking chairs. So great, you know, great session. We had a full room. I'm really happy about that. We were also, I think, you know, still we've seen some of the gaps that we have in terms of the applications that we've seen and the services, but also in terms of the early warnings for all initiative, you know, some areas where I think it would be great to do some more work. And really always the idea for us has been to say, you know, it's not so much about companies or coming with solutions, but it's for us to understand the gaps that we have and then to address those with AI. And I think we've made some really good progress. We're also always looking for new partners, and I see GSMA and NetHope are here, and I think I'm hoping that you know, we're going to get more partners on board for our AI for early warnings for all subgroup. We have calls every 2 weeks. We will certainly have a session at the next COP, maybe at the next ANGA. So there's other opportunities. And I think, what's also really exciting is that we heard that donors want to see AI. So there's some opportunities there also. And maybe the last sort of lesson learned is that next time we need more time. Or more time, or maybe have focus on one area. But I think anyway, it's been a great afternoon. I was in Antigua 18 hours ago. I thought I was going to fall asleep, but that didn't happen because of so many exciting things happening here. So thank you, everyone. Thank you to my co-pillar leads, co-pillar friends, and everyone who made a presentation, and everyone who listened and asked questions. Thank you.